You see that trend?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Translating English to English.
Because
So
the reporter asked a question with like kind of
An
Indian
Indian.
accent, and then Trump had a translator to translate the Indian accent English.
and yeah, in front of everyone, Trump was like, "I had no idea what he just said." And then
Yeah, that's right. We're live, so we'll get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Saturday Free School for Philosophy Black Liberation. We have had an important week, and today we'll continue our discussion from last week on a new theory of the state and how do we understand the US state at this time. And we're going to do this by looking at two different political actors at this time. And one of them is Steve Bannon, who was the former I think he was the former chief strategist with the first Trump White House, and the other is Chris Hedges, who's a journalist, and like he's one of the leftist intellectuals who also look at the Trump presidency in a different way. So I'm excited for today's discussion, and I'll ask Doc to begin.
Okay. Thanks a lot, and good morning, and welcome back. It's so good to see you, Emily. We missed you, and Trevor and her brother and her mother are here. Such a pleasure to have you all here. And I hope it's not your last time. Yeah. What's your brother's name?
Ron.
Ron, yeah. Pleased to meet
Ron
you.
served with your last name.
What'd you say? Okay, I can't still put another thing. That's all right. Don't pay me no attention. Well, we have a lot to talk about. A lot has happened in the last week. In particular, and I guess you all could fill in a lot of this because such fast breaking news, and there's so much commentary on both the mainstream and social media, and really, to tell you the truth, the commentary often is as important as the events themselves, because so much is about interpreting events and what side will achieve what, Jerry, you call narrative hegemony. What interpretation of events will be dominant? And that's why we'll get to Chris Hedges and what's his name? Bannon, Stephen Bannon. Two apparently opposite points of view. And I just want to say, with a common epistemology and a common misunderstanding of American history, and neither has ever seen a Black person that could tell them anything about American or Black history. A kind of white hubris or arrogance. But we'll get to that after we talk about these events. And if I leave something out, you all fill it in. I guess the big thing was the phone meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin over the question of ending the war in Ukraine. But the implications are much greater than that. What we're looking at is ending the military, political, financial architecture, which was built primarily by the Americans after World War II. 80 years of the way business, quote unquote, was being done is now disintegrating. In a lot of ways, what accelerated that is the Biden administration itself in provoking the war in the Ukraine and then establishing a narrative hegemony or interpretive hegemony, and went with the idea that the evil Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine as a first step to reestablishing the Soviet Union and a first step towards the invasion of Western Europe, and so on and on and on, all of which was complete foolishness and lies. It was the Biden administration that provoked this war. Their intention was to defeat Russia and thus bring down the Putin regime. It was a first step towards regime change. In an extraordinary reversal, and here we have to call it just that, going beyond anything that I would have expected from the Trump administration. And here now we're talking about the administration, Vice President Vance, Secretary of Defense Hickseth, and Secretary of State Rubio. But it is Trump calling Putin for 3 years now. The Biden administration refused to negotiate peace, refused to reach out to the Russian government to even talk to them, imposed the most onerous sanctions that had ever been imposed on any country, which ironically only made the Russian economy stronger and opened up a whole new area of doing business with India, with China, with Iran, North Korea, and so on, and abandoning any desire on the part of Putin and those who think like him to couple the Russian economy with Western Europe. They cut him off, and he then found another way to go. So they're stronger now, 3 years after the war in Ukraine began, than they were at the beginning. I think politically, Putin is stronger. I think he's had a reality check. I think he suffered from a lot of illusions about the West. But I think Trump's abandonment of the West and of NATO, I don't have the language to express how, from their point of view, how catastrophic this is. If the United States pulls out of NATO, or let's say stays in NATO, legally in NATO, but in every other way does not support NATO, what becomes of the whole question of Western security? As you know, one of the conditions at the beginning of the war in Ukraine that the Putin government put forward was the discovery of a new security architecture for Europe, which I think would have included denuclearization, the limitation of intermediate nuclear weapons, a whole set of things, but where the security of Russia, its concerns about its security, were part of any redrawing the security architecture in Europe. Now, just parenthetically, this is huge because the two most devastating wars in history were fought in Europe, and such. So if Europe is militarily in conflict with Russia or the Soviet Union, it destabilizes the whole continent or subcontinent. That's what I call Europe. But by sanctioning Russia, and I think I'm not telling you all anything you don't know, it pushed Russia to China. And this huge strategic alliance between China and Russia, which includes everything, it's a comprehensive agreement. But then pushing India and China closer together, which is good for both and especially for India. But then pushing Russia to a strategic alliance with Iran and North Korea. So in effect, you have this core of nations in Asia, and this I want to underline Asia, the most populous continent, and the greatest challenge to the West economically and other ways. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, an alliance. The core of a broader alliance called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I forget how many, there are at least 20 Asian nations that are a part of that. And at the core of it are Russia and China. This, in effect, shift from the centrality of Europe to the centrality of Asia. This is what we're looking at. And Trump is neither the fascist or the idiot he's portrayed as in the Western media, in the American media. The move to call, he called Putin. Putin didn't call him. He calls Putin before he calls Zelensky. He says, in effect, we want to make peace and end this war as quickly as possible, and we don't need the Ukrainian government, which everybody, including Trump and Putin, have said it again and again, is an illegal government at this point because Zelensky was supposed to constitutionally run for president about 6 or 7 months ago. So they didn't have an election. So who was the legitimate government? There is no legitimate government. And Zelensky rules by fiat and the fact that most of the military is on his side, which might not last that much longer. The guy's life is in danger right now from his own people. Trump calls no European leader, calls Zelensky only after he has talked about the terms of negotiation with Putin. There is presently or currently the meeting of the Russians and the American negotiators in Saudi Arabia. But the guy that was supposed to be Trump's negotiator for Ukraine, General Kellogg, and he came up with some nonsense about, a Korea Peninsula settlement and a whole lot of BS, as though the Americans and the Ukrainians have very much to say about it. This war has already been decided by the force of arms, and the Russians have won. And NATO is a spent force. They keep talking, Macron, the president of France, we're going to send a European army into Ukraine. So everybody said, well, where are you going to get the army from? Y'all ain't got nothing now. I mean, the French army is kind of an expeditionary force. They go into small African countries and beat up people and overturn governments. But, if you say, let's really get into a throwdown, it's like sending the Pennsylvania National Guard up against the Chinese army. I mean, they don't, the Europeans, and it's not, I don't take this as a negative, have over the last 80 years, more or less gave up on studying war. And they look to the United States to defend them. And Trump is the one that said, no, if you can't pay up. It was a hell of a gangster move, by the way. I have to put it on the level of gangster, not diplomacy. He said, no, you got to take your payment up to 2% of your GDP. Then he came in to the presidency this time and said, no, you got to pay 5%, which he knows would bankrupt the European governments in the same way that this huge military spending has bankrupted our country. The only difference is that the US dollar has what they call exorbitant privilege in world investment and trade, And therefore, we have gotten away with this overspending on military and wars because of the strength of the dollar. We can come back to that. But nonetheless, Europe, in so many ways, and this is a very important thing, is a spent civilizational force. The people just, I mean, they're not doing bad. They're more or less living better than most of us over here because they have this social safety net. But you go to Europe not to meet people, but to go to museums. I mean, there's nothing happening. Music they more or less get from black people, and so it's dead. Europe is dead. They can't fight. They don't need to fight because we don't need war. The United States pushed them into this war. We don't have to go through all of it. But Trump's move shocked and has sent European governments into a state of anxiety, like, where do we go from here? And can governments like the French government, the German government, the British government, can they hold in the face of this? In other words, will they be defeated in elections? We could go more into that. The other thing is, and of course, outside of Trump, I don't see Rubio or Hegseth or even Vance as principal movers and deciders. Trump is doing this. And I want to come back to an assessment of him. When Rubio, contrary to everything he had said over the course of his senatorial career, comes out and says, we are in a multipolar world, the unipolar world, that is, where the United States is a, quote, only superpower. You remember that? Oh, we're the only superpower. Let's go in and kill some people. Oh, we're the only superpower. Let's give Israel 2,000-pound bombs to kill children because we can do whatever we want, that kind of thing. Well, Rubio said that was always an aberration. The world has never had a single unipower. Now, I disagree with that. The Roman Empire was a single hegemon, and probably in different regions of the world you had more or less that. But America as a single superpower when the Soviet Union collapsed, established a unique situation maybe for over the last 300 years. There'd always been, and that's where all the theories of international relations, international statecraft come from. The competition of competing European nations and empires. Be it over the slave trade, be it over the colonial division of Africa, be it over the colonization of Asia. China is the great example of the partnership, so to speak, between all of these European nations to control the Chinese economy. What they call the century of humiliation, which kind of began a little bit before the century. But India, which was totally British, and then the carving up of Africa among European nations. So it was always these alliances, and wars were fought between different alliances over the ways, the two world wars, by the way, over the ways the world's colonial nations would be divided up, and so on. Now, that having been said, these two world wars exhausted Europe. Were it not for the fact that the United States came out of World War II literally unscathed. Unscathed. The Soviets lost 27 million people in World War II. I think we lost about 150,000. You know what I'm saying? Or maybe 1,500,000, something like that. A minuscule part of the deaths. It's estimated the Chinese lost 30 million. I think that's the war with Japan and the Civil War. So, huge population losses. But Europe comes out unable to remain a colonial empires. The French lose in Vietnam. The British can't hold on to India, which is huge for them, given all that they had stolen from India. Africa challenges the French, the British, the Germans, and so on in Africa for independence. So Europe collapses. We go to a stage of what is called neo-colonialism, which is an American invention. Colonialism without occupying your country, but controlling your currency and your resources and your access to loans and so on. So the United States, without having to say it, was the hegemon, the indispensable nation in terms of Western imperialism. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, you then get a situation where the United States will seek revenge over the Soviet Union and those countries allied to the Soviet Union. And I always say this, Mikhail Gorbachev was an active part of what then occurred. The overthrow of the Soviet Union meant the Soviet Union ceased to be a world power. But ideologically, it abandoned what it stood for and stood on. Nowhere was this better expressed than the betrayal of Cuba. But you could also say Korea and a number of the famines that occurred in the 1990s was a direct result of the illegal breaking of the Soviet treaty with North Korea, which I think involved food, trade, and other things, aid. But somehow we got through it. And just forgive me if I'm talking a little too long. The unexpected rise of China. By the time the Soviet Union collapses, China was still in an economic crisis that went back to the Cultural Revolution and that disruption. The Cultural Revolution in China, 1966 to 1976, went from a political struggle among elites and within the Communist Party, which is a very important thing to study, because what Mao and his followers initiated was a political war which took on the form of a civil war against those who did not side with Mao, in spite of the fact that many of those were people who had fought in the Chinese Revolution, had been on the Long March, such as Deng Xiaoping, Zhu Da, Zhou Enlai, Lin Piao. I mean, I can't forget every name, but they went after these people. So it was an attempt by Mao to take over the Communist Party and direct the future of China the way he imagined it. It tore up China. And we still don't know the magnitude of the destruction. But then with the death of Mao and the coming to power of a pragmatic group under Deng Xiaoping, that you have this opening up. The United States has an interest in wooing China towards an economic alliance, not political and military, by the way, an economic alliance with China, that we can produce apples, we can produce televisions, we can produce other consumer goods in China at a much cheaper price than they can be produced here. So the alliance with China was part of a grander neoliberal economic policy, which leads to deindustrialization. You want to know why people ain't working in Philadelphia the way they used to? You want to know why you have all of these factories that we have gone around and looked at? Well, you could literally trace it back to the early 1980s and the deindustrialization, which, by the way, is part of the explanation for what happened in the election of 2024. People no longer trusted the party in power, which were the Democrats, but which were the Republicans and Democrats, because their material conditions had only worsened over the last 40 years. Wages have flatlined for the last 50 years. People had to turn to credit to pay bills. I might be one of them right now because my money is funny. But anyway, that's another question. So then you have China, which flips it. The West and the United States had felt that with economic relations with China, at this level, that we would flip China, that members of the Chinese Communist Party, and there are significant numbers of members of the Chinese Communist Party that are more aligned with liberals in the United States. People think, oh, is this, one party, everybody think alike, and if you don't agree with Deng Xiaoping or Xi Jinping, somebody gonna kill you, all of this mythology that they make up in this country, which is only not even good fiction. It is. It's like comic book shit. But it's such a disgrace the way they have abused the American people with these lies and this fiction shit. But China, where U.S. and Western investment were confined to certain industrial zones. It was not as though they took over the entire Chinese economy. But then Deng Xiaoping taking a step back from the Maoist concept of the long march to communism, and that was Mao. We could talk more about it. I mean, a genius, but a madman on other occasions, But the Chinese saved. The Chinese organized their society. The Chinese Communist Party had to win the Chinese people back. They had lost the people. People don't understand this. I mean, so Deng Xiaoping comes out with slogans like, it's all right to make money. Money is a cool thing. That's a strange thing to hear the head of a communist party say, which, contrary to the assessment of Emily Dong, who believes that all organized crime suddenly disappeared in China after 5,000 years. I said, no, China got some of the most sophisticated gangsters in the world. But anyway, they learned from the Japanese and they have their own style. But once Deng Xiaoping said money is a beautiful thing, all the gangsters came out. Some of them joined the Communist Party. Because what do gangsters do? Make money, right? But that having been said, what he was saying is we cannot romanticize economic development. China's a poor country, and it was poor then, and it took, well, in this recent period, at least 2.5 generations to end deep poverty. And they did it. They did it. A very huge achievement. And in the process, in the course of this, they created an economy where the people feel that the government works in their behalf. It is viewed as the second largest economy in some ways of measuring these things. But if you use a purchasing power parity rather than GDP, it might be the largest economy. If it is not now, it will be that by 2030. And its development has been more or less crisis-free. And the people see a constant rise in the quality of their lives. And, you know, I really appreciate hearing about this from Emily when she goes, and Kathy and Alice, how even they will see tremendous changes in the infrastructure, in public transportation, in the building of things that the people need to survive, and so on. It is spectacular. And it is, and then of course with DeepSeek and their capturing of the leading position in AI. No small thing. And they did it literally. They did it for $5.5 million. What it took OpenAI, I think, 100 million. And just the whole, you know, thing but anyway, let me just get quick. When Rubio says we are in a multipolar world, which is different than the narrative of the Biden, the Obama, and other administrations, the Bushes, and so on, that we are indispensable, that the world needs a hegemon like the United States to balance things out, and so on. I said, no, we cannot assume that we are the single most important nations. All of these nations, including Russia and China, have security, financial, and economic interests, which we have to respect. This is radically different from what Biden was saying, what Blinken and that group of, I won't curse, bums was saying, that got us closer to World War III than any other administration, parenthetically. That's why the Black misleadership class betrayed Black people. All of them. All of them. And we'll get into that, even raising my voice. And then Trump. But then Trump has a press conference just the other day, and I'm looking at it, you know, they're running it live on MSNBC and CNN. So I'm digging it. You know, it's Trump. I mean, unlike Biden, at least the man is aware. I mean, literally woke. You know, not that, you know, and I mean, you know, I'm not hating on people that have Alzheimer's. But don't tell me the man is wrapped in his right mind. You know, the way he was carrying on. But that's a joke. But, and then he says that he wants a summit between Xi Jinping of China, Vladimir Putin of Russia, and himself. The three military superpowers, to discuss what? Well, many things, I guess. But what he highlighted to cut our military budgets in half. Now, just to give you a bit of context, this is something we've been calling for the last 50 years. This is what Martin Luther King was calling for. You know, in the book, Where Do We Go From Here? Cut the military budget, and it was not even half of what it is today. Turn all of those funds towards fighting poverty, to educate people, to build infrastructure. This guy, in 2024, just 3 weeks into his thing, says we will cut the military budget by 50%. Okay, so we get the Chris Hedges of the world. He's lying. Well, how you know he's lying? He said it. Then he says, in effect, in the same news conference, that we, the nuclear superpowers, must begin to do away with nuclear weapons. He had, I think, a week earlier, said something to the effect that he would put sanctions on Iran, but he was not for war with Iran. Okay. We can interpret all of this when we go forward. I don't want to say a lot more. But I think this week, as you know, Sambarta and I, we were talking on the phone, and of course, with Purba, and just this, in a certain way, is, you could not have predicted it. You could not have predicted it. The main question on the agenda of humanity is to prevent war, to prevent genocide. You know, you get a lot of Black civil rights leaders, and especially if you listen to WURD, which I don't. I just get reports from my friends who do. Oh, don't worry about foreign affairs. We got to be concerned about what's going on to us here. Well, that is so at odds with the Black movement. And then you come, Al Sharpton, I'm a civil rights leader. No, you're not. You're a hustler, a poverty pimp. That's what they call back in. You getting paid by branding yourself as that and serving the interests of the richest, most powerful militarists and capitalists in the world. I mean, how'd you get so rich on civil rights when everybody else that was in civil rights got poor? But you got rich. But don't worry about that. And, you know, we just got to be concerned with the police. Yeah, we got to be concerned with the police, but we have to be concerned like King and Robeson and everything in the Black movement with the question of world peace. And again, I'll just say this, Trevon, I'm sorry, forgive me. You see, the extent to which the history of the civil rights movement has been distorted is unbelievable. After the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and King said, now the question that we must take up is poverty, peace, and civil rights. Once he is assassinated, the whole leadership of the civil rights movement, or most of them, took on the question of world peace and joined the world movement for peace. Any, quote, civil rights leader that trivializes the peace movement and peace as a central part of the agenda of civil rights, King going so far as to say, we cannot achieve genuine civil rights unless we achieve peace. And it was true then, and it's more true today. But, okay, I'll just end. This last week is spectacular I kind of disagreed with Sambarto. I'm happy, but I still preserve a sense of realism and skepticism because that's Trump and his administration saying that, but the deep state is institutionalized. I'll say it again, as I've said before, the knives are out, assassination is on the agenda, threats of assassination, and let me just say, and I don't think we can look at the world of America through rose-colored glasses. They attempted to assassinate Trump twice already. I know they play it down in the mainstream media. No. There were 2 assassination attempts. Were there other plans? Yes, I would say so. But are there assassination plans on the table now? Yes. Why do I say that? I went through a decade of assassinations in the 60s. I saw it with my own eyes, where anyone that was a threat to the deep state and the war and empire policies of the United States were killed. John F. Kennedy, 1963. I mean, it was so shocking. I was a kid, man. How could this happen? How could they assassinate? Because we had this idea of Kennedy. He was tall, he was handsome, he had a wife and children. And our first, and it seemed like he wanted to do good, and he had talked to Martin Luther King when he was running for president. Just a whole number of things like that. And we said, oh no, what can we do? I mean, they killed him, and that time. We were just shocked. The nation was shocked. And then they assassinate Malcolm X. And that was the FBI. Cold-blooded. The cats that they sent to jail for that, they weren't even anywhere near the Autobahn Auditorium. That was the FBI. Then Martin Luther King Jr., completely the FBI and CIA. There's no question about it. Then Robert F. Kennedy a month later. I mean, okay, then you could say Fred Hampton, 1969. But you were looking at this. So, I've seen it. And, I just want to say, a lot of people saw things, but forget things. Or saw things and will leave that. See, I don't understand that anyway. History is best qualified to reward all research. And memory of things, events, is sometimes more potent than history, writing history itself. What you saw, what people saw. And thus, people have taken their eye off the prize. But it happened. And it could happen again. The threat to the state is more pronounced now than then. Trump is a greater threat to the deep state than Kennedy was. The 2 things, I want to just tell you this. The 2 things that got Kennedy into trouble is 1, he did not support the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. And 2, when he said he wants to cut the CIA up into 1,000 pieces and throw it into the sea. Oh, now you have to die. I don't care how good looking you are. I don't care how beautiful your family is. Now you start dealing with real power and empire. You got to go. King, he says, we will make civil rights laws a living reality. That is the substance of civil rights, not just the laws saying you got civil rights and you're too poor and broke to actualize it. He says we must cut the military budget. we must end war. They said, okay, now you have to die. You know what I'm saying? So if you think about it, this is where we are now. So the knives are out. The assassinators have been given their orders and are preparing if the order is given. And who makes that decision? It's hard to say. But one thing is for certain, too much in just a month has been challenged and is now being overturned. After World War II, the United States set up the architecture of Western imperialism, of Western capitalism. Europe would be rebuilt, but the European nations would be vassals of the United States. All major decisions would be made by the United States, and y'all just go along with it. The only cat that challenged that in the 60s was Charles de Gaulle of France. The only one. The rest of them were like, it's just a disgrace. They had no opinion. Whatever the Americans say, they did. Then the fatal last event is when they went along with the invasion, the war against Russia and the sanctions on Russia. That effectively ended NATO. NATO is an arm of American military domination of the world. No two ways about it. It goes down. The world as we have known it for 80 years is on its way to going down. This is what this week means. I don't think that's a surprise to us here. We have been looking at this, studying this for several years. And those who doubted our analysis out there in virtual reality, all I got to say is, you need to bow down and recognize, like they say, you need to put some respect on our name. We had it right. I was saying to Pura, I sent it to somebody. Oh no, I sent it to Nori. I said, if the free school goes dark, Philadelphia is dark. And this is not braggadocio at all. It's only a recognition. We stayed on this. We did not bend towards what was so-called popular or the media or leaders. And I think we've been proven right on this. Now, what is the thing? Okay, it's about Trump, what this movement is about, and the shifting of the architecture of the world system. But okay, we'll come back to that. But I just wanted to just say briefly about the two interviews. Steve Bannon with doing that. When you hear him say it, this is a writer in the New York Times that we follow his writing, a public intellectual of, he's a very brilliant guy, I'll put it that way. But his name, I'm trying to figure out where he got the name. Because when you look at it, it's like a ghetto name. Do that. Ross, do that. I'm telling you. But the way he says it, I guess it's in classic German or English or something. Ross, how does it do that? Doubt it. Yeah, doubt it. But if you look at it, it's like not Ralph, Ross, do that. Yeah. And then Kathy named him Ross doing that. But I've never seen, I had suggested that he convert to Islam and take on a Muslim name. But anyway, so that's a strange. But anyway, Steve Bannon, he had an interview, about an hour and something interview on the New York Times podcast. And then Mark Lamont Hill did an interview with Chris Hedges. And, I guess there's certain, and I don't guess, there are certain commonalities, even though they're on opposite sides, it appears, of the political equation. Steve Bannon is in the MAGA movement. He was the campaign manager and strategist for Trump's 2016 race. He's a quote, he tries to present himself as a firebrand with thuggish tendencies. He ain't no thug. He's, excuse me for using this language, especially in the church. In his interview, he's referring to people, and this is his, as pussy. They pussy. You only did 4 months in prison, man. Don't come out there like like you did a bit. I did a bit, I'm a prisoner. I'm a Mummy Abu Jamal been down for 40-some years. You ain't did nothing. But now, everybody's a pussy and a bee and all. Now, this is a cat that went to Harvard Business School. But he turned thug along the way. But he's making an argument for the populist, nationalist wing of the MAGA movement. A good part of the interview is him saying that the tech oligarchs are nothing but liberals who saw the handwriting on the wall and came over to Trump at the end, and that he says that when you see them all at the inauguration standing up, he said it's like the Japanese generals on what was the ship where they surrendered at? Yeah, where they surrendered to General MacArthur, and all of the Japanese generals were standing there. He said these tech oligarchs, their being there was a recognition of their surrender and their defeat by Trump. And now they have to find a modus operandi with him. But then he makes other claims about techno-feudalism, a term that's being used a lot, where AI and chips could extend human life, biological life, could usher in through AI and other things a transhuman world, that is, where the spiritual and what we would consider normal life of a human being is determined by technology. In other words, if I have a baby, or if the woman that I'm with has a baby tomorrow, and I say, I want my baby to play running back and be like Shaquan Barkley, you know what I'm saying? Or I want my child to have all of that physical ability to play football or basketball, but at the same time be a genius. I can do a chip on him. You know what I'm saying? Now I don't know what the outcome will be, but he will live forever and be an athlete till he decides he don't want. In other words, the creation, which we've talked about here, Ayn Rand, a Superman. And that's what they call the post-human world, or what they also call the singularity. Now, If you listen to Bannon's interview, oh, he's going strong. You know what I'm saying? When Ross do that, try to, ask him, no, let me, talk, all this gangster, unnecessary. I mean, it's like bullying a 90-pound weakling. The boy, Ross do that ain't cut like that. So you going after, no, I'm going to, let me finish. Man said, well, hold on, let me just, no, I'm going to get you straight. All that. That's the way he presents himself. And plus, you look at him again, and y'all don't recognize these things I do. The man's an alcoholic. He looks too wild and crazy, and he is. But no, I'm going, And so anyway, until he got to the transhuman thing, the crisis of humanity as such, part of the thing that we have been dealing in this year, Baldwin. What is a human being? And do does society have a right to unleash certain technologies on the human to so redesign the human that we're all alike? That you don't get any more John Coltrane's because we're all alike. We might live forever, but there is no difference, no creativity, no art. Everything will be a redo of what was, and everybody will be in the white imaginary of what it is to be. Does that make sense? That is what they. So when he gets there, then he becomes the pussy. Excuse me for using that language. He becomes, if you remember it, he kind of gets scared. He gets nervous. And then he uses this trope, which is, just, it infuriates me. The Chinese Communist Party is responsible for what DeepSeek did. Them people ain't involved with the Communist Party. The Communist Party didn't even know what them cats were, the AI thing. They didn't even know what they were doing. When they came out, remember when they came out, then the premier of China said, can I have a meeting with you so you can tell me what you do? They didn't even know what was going on because the economy is like that. It's an entrepreneurial economy. So to say that TikTok and Redbook and DeepSeek are all a part of a Chinese conspiracy to take us, by which Steve Bannon means white folks, down. And here are and this trope goes way back, the yellow hordes of Asia taking over our thing. AI was us. If we control AI, we can control the world. That's why all them hundreds of billions of dollars. But then the small Chinese firm punctures the balloon of white supremacy, of a world where everybody would be white, at least in their brain, because we would all be designed by technology driven by algorithms. I mean, just we could go, Okay, Bannon. Bannon sees a class and ideological conflict within the MAGA movement. This interview is done before Trump makes these moves towards peace in Ukraine and redesigning the world. And I don't know what else. One thing he does say, and it helps to explain, all this random talk that Trump engages in, some of it very odious and despicable, like the stuff about Gaza. Sometimes, shut up. But to see, that's the white man in it. But as Alex Greiner, a commentator on some of these YouTubes, and Steve Bannon said it, their thing is to flood, what did they say? Flood
The zone.
the zone. They don't, the whole media is against them. So what do? They say everything at the same time. So the media is going to respond to everything until, you know how a system that is overloaded and can't, it collapses. So the media, which responds to everything he says equally, does not always see what the real deal is. So while he's talking about we want Greenland and the Panama Canal and all that stuff, the real deal is ending the war in Ukraine and the establishment through an alliance with Putin and Xi Jinping of cutting military spending and so on. Does that mean that I'm walking down the street with a MAGA flag, long live Trump? No, not at all. But what Trump shows is a realism and an understanding of world politics and the world relationship of forces. And he's not afraid to say what he's going to do. In part, that's why a lot of people like him when they don't like everything he says. At least he will say what's on his mind. Ain't nobody writing his speeches and stuff like that, like Biden. Everything he do got to be with a teleprompter. If he comes in and says, good morning, they have to write it out for him. The man's brain is gone. It's a shame. And then, probably the medications he's on. I often say, both legal and illegal. Don't forget, they found all that cocaine in the West Wing. So I'm not making any claims, conspiratorially or otherwise, of how it got there, but it was there. So, But I don't know. But anyway. But Bannon says that he represents the real working class MAGA movement. Now, this is where epistemology plays a huge role. Like Hedges, they want to establish their bona fides as people from the working class. Steve Bannon, I grew up in a Catholic family. My father worked in the post office or something like that. My mother would stay home, and I was working class. We were Kennedy Democrats. That kind of work. I'm from the working class. But one thing they never tell you, did you ever run into a black worker? Because, see, they're imaginary. Their assumption, which drives their epistemology, is that the world is white, and the world is better when it is white. And what MAGA has to do is to rebalance things so whiteness is not seen as a negative, and certainly not viewed in the way that Baldwin does. And so Bannon and Hedges will talk about white people and the white working class in the ways that Orrin Cass, this thinker for J.D. Vance, the Republican Party must become a working class party that reflects the values of white people, white working people. You see what I'm saying? That it is a return to a past that in these people's heads they never left. And here, the question of the epistemology, the imaginary, the identity. You want to be white, you will lose. If that's what you want, you cannot win. There is no win with whiteness. This is a difficult Because most white people, I would say most 90%, cannot imagine a personal transformation where they're no longer white. Not yet. Okay, that's bad. Then we go over to Hedges. Hedges is completely defeated. On one side, Bannon seems celebratory because of the election victory. But he sees battles ahead, especially with the what he calls the donors, the rich people who have coalesced around Trump. And it's interesting that Bannon, while calling everybody else different names and all that type of thing and trying to be a thug, when it comes to Trump, he gets like a pussy himself. Whatever Trump would say, I would go along with. I think his judgment, I think he looks upon Trump as this visionary, prophetic figure. And he puts him on the level of other presidents like Washington and Lincoln, you know, and would pretty much see him the way Dudat saw him, as a man of destiny, okay, which of course we disagree with. But at that level, that's the way Bannon sees it. Okay, Chris Hedges. And I'll just quickly. To understand Hedges' interview, you have to start from the end, you know, because it's like a teleology. The end explains the event, you know what I'm saying? Because everything is driving towards this end. And it's pretty much like Gerald Horne's historiography. Everything is inevitably leading to Trump and to American fascism. Chris Hedges is saying the same thing. So you take Gerald's work, which we now know is really sad. So much not even plagiarism, but distortion of fact to make a political point. America was a counter-revolution from the beginning, that this evolution of counter-revolution in the United States has led now to fascism and Trump. And Trump is a fascist in their minds. The same thing with Chris Hedges, although Chris Hedges does not do it from history, you know, the history of events like Gerald does. Chris Hedges does it from the standpoint of ideology and ideas, you know, and Mark Lamont Hill, who agrees with Chris Hedges and therefore could not do an interview except by throwing softballs for Chris Hedges to hit out of the ballpark. He didn't ask him anything, you know? The only place they disagreed was on the question of transgender and something like that, you know, queer theory, you know? Which, by the way, parenthetically, for people like Mark and postmodern thinkers, queer theory, now this is different than being a homosexual. A queer theory is a theory for the people who adhere to it, a unifying theory of society and history, which its end goal is what Bannon referred to as transhumanism. That you can be, and I guess it's like joining the army, you can be whatever you want to be, you know, whatever you want to be, technology can do that. So Mark will make the statement, a transgender woman can have a baby. Well, how they going to do that? They ain't got no uterus. Okay. See, that's a whole nother story. But a transgender woman, now, Okay, but see, that whole discourse is just the open form of a deeper set of epistemologies and assumptions about humanity and about society. In other words, if certain things that have meant something for hundreds of thousands of years no longer mean anything, okay? If woman don't mean something biologically as well as sociologically, but you got to have both. If I can transform or if I can defy biology by my identity, where I can say, I'm a woman. I wear a dress like a woman. I switch like a woman. You understand? The question is, am I a woman? Okay, you can say, well, I got surgical stuff that took me from one form, an anatomical form, the anatomy, not the biology. There is a difference. That's what, so we could talk this all day long. You know, I'm 6'6".
Right. Right.
I'm a man, transformed a woman. Now I want to be on the women's basketball team. I mean, I'm a dominate. You know what I'm saying? You don't see no transgender men talking about, I want to be on the football team. You know what I'm saying? Or I want to be on the wrestling team. You just say, I'm a transgender man. I want to drive an 18-wheeler.
Right.
But they ain't talking about throwing down in the Olympics and wrestling and all and lifting weights. No. It's all on the transgender. And the question is, what is this gender discourse about? And is it not a new form of re-engineering all societal relationships? And we can talk more about that. But it is what they call queer theory is considered by the people who advocate a unifying theory of society. Literally a theory of everything about society, including societal futures. And therefore, if the Chinese say, look, we ain't down with that, oh, y'all are reactionary because the revolution is in the West and on the question of gender. We see it so often where the political soldiers on the ground for the queer movement are, first of all, they're very abusive. In other words, they want you to believe that they are revolutionary fighters and yada, yada, yada. So they can shout you down, they can disrespect you if you allow it, because you are disrespecting my gender decision. No, I'm not disrespecting it. You know, I put some respect if that's the way you want to roll. But don't act like your theory of gender is the unifying theory of society. And don't act like that has suddenly replaced the struggle for Black freedom, as though Black people are now free. And you, as a white person who is gender fluid, you are now more oppressed than a Black poor person or Black poor child in South Philadelphia High School. You know, no, money, you're not. You know, and so on. You know what I'm saying? I won't go further. But that's the only place that Mark had a little disagreement with Chris Hedges. But Chris ends with fascism has won. We, meaning people like himself, have lost. And then he goes here, which is for me very infuriating. And like the Black slaves, okay. Now, when he went to like the Black, you don't know nothing about no black slaves, like the black slaves. But see, this is that virtue signaling. I'm not a white supremacist because I'm going to invoke the black slaves. Like the black slaves, I fight not because I believe I will win. I fight because I must. I said, man, come on, money. Now this is a cat. Okay, he invokes his working class. I'm from Maine. My mother and father were working class up there, but I went to Harvard, and then I got a job with the New York Times, the biggest newspaper in the world. You know, what we call that, what Du Bois called that, is the transubstantiation of the poor white. That chapter where he talks about Andrew Johnson, who became president. He went from a poor white to president. It's what they call the transubstantiation. Whiteness allows for the more fluid transition from one class to another. That's what they call the American dream. But it's a white dream, a white imaginary. So Chris Hedges, I'm from Maine, my people up there, my father worked in the coal mines, chopping trees. Everybody got a story. Everybody worked hard. We built the nation. And really, the only people that really can claim that narrative are black folk. Of course, we really did build the nation. But no, I'm working class stock, and I went to Harvard. Now that's already you done going into deep doo-doo. I went to Harvard, and I then went to theology school, and he says, like my friend Cornell, we can quote Aquinas, and we know. And, that's another interview. I'm sorry, another cat. They cat from Princeton and Cornell West. They discussing. And so then they went into citing various philosophers, Plato, and just like Socrates and yada yada. Oh, you should have heard it. Oh, they were so, we so cute. I could now express all of my ideas and show off my learning to everybody, But so that's Chris. But Chris Hedges has accepted the defeat of the liberals and the left. And they were defeated not by Trump, they were defeated by the people. This last election, more than any recent ones, was an election where the people decided. There's no way in the world that Trump could have won, given all that was thrown at him. The lawsuits, assassination attempts, impeachment, the complete media, for the most part, against him. No way. He was down in Mar-a-Lago. It's like, the film. You ever hear the film, The Lion in Winter? The Lion in Winter. The Lion in Winter is the lion, the warrior, who cannot fight any other battles. So he retreats into his lair, the lion. And so that was Trump. They were threatened. I mean, if the guy had gone to jail, he wouldn't have lived very long. You know what I'm saying? And he could have gone to jail. I mean, you had Letitia James, you had Bragg up in New York. Now they might go to jail now because Trump got power over there. You had Fonnie Willis down in Atlanta. Then you get boyfriend that was the head of the Justice Department. They're all dealing with January 6th and whether Trump was an insurrection. They was going to try. So, I mean, when you put it all together, boyfriend could have done a serious bid. And then, of course, all of these court cases were designed to deplete whatever funds he had. You know what I'm saying? So they coming at him hard. And then they would send all of these people down there, different leading Republicans. That's the lion is in retreat. The lion has been defeated, and they just going down to check on his pulse. Are you still alive? Yeah, badly. This cat came out of that and wins. It had never been done. But it was the people. And to understand this election, you have to understand the levels of discontent of the people, including all of the people. And I would say, if you take the Chris Hedges and the Steve Bannons, they talk like a lot of these people, they still do not understand the people. And least of all, the key part of the American population since slavery, the African American people. The most advanced part of the society. They don't understand it. So they talk of a world that is only white people. Their epistemology is anchored to assumptions about the supremacy of white people. You cannot get, I don't know how it felt when you all were listening to it. It's kind of, you feel abused. It's abusive to hear people talk like that, and the history of, if you don't know, just know since 1955 and the Montgomery movement, just know that. And what does that tell you? What do you learn from that? But they don't even know that, and don't even try to know it, which is, I don't know the words, but they don't even try to know. But yet, they want to tell you the nation has entered fascism. The people voted in fascism, all of which is untrue. End here. We may have entered the most decisive moment in American history, even more than the Civil War. The direction or possible directions that the country could take, as we've said before, it could be a pre-revolutionary moment where the crisis of the state makes possible the possibility of a new democracy. As we have said, revolutions are seldom armed takeovers of the state. That was not the case in Russia. That was not the case in China. That was not the case in Cuba. In each instance of these great revolutions, what happened, or the Indian anti-colonial struggle for that matter, is that the previous regime, in China, the emperor, in Russia, the czar, they had already left. So there was no symbol, no center of state power. So the revolutionaries literally walked in and took over the government. That's what Lenin and them did. That's what Sun Yat-sen and them did in China. The thing that delayed the consolidation of the democratic revolution in China was when the Kuomintang turned on the communists and entered into this 20-some year civil war, which was combined also with the Japanese invasion. That's a whole other story. But in each case, the state collapses. If, for all kinds of reasons that we cannot predict, the US state collapses, what then follows it? What comes next? There is a possibility of the collapse of the state. These contradictions and tensions that we see being played out, where The CIA is going to come under attack. The FBI is going to come under attack. The Department of National Intelligence, which includes 18 intelligence agencies, is coming under attack, being dismantled. Well, then what's left of the state? Can the state defend itself from an energized and angry people? If it goes into crisis, I don't think it can. The other possibility is civil war, and that would be provoked by the ruling elite. They could do it in many ways to delay the collapse of the state and a democratic takeover by the people. And I want to underline the word democratic. Democratic does not mean liberal or bourgeois. Democratic could mean people's democracy, or it could mean bourgeois democracy, elite democracy, you know? But to delay a democratic transition in the country, the elite could initiate a civil war. The other thing is, which could, be even connected to the previous two, is society becomes ungovernable. We already see signs of that. I would say in a lot of ways, Philadelphia is an ungoverned city, or at least a very poorly governed city. This is not normal. The Eagles could win every year. We could have a parade every year. It ain't going to change nothing. This city is being governed poorly, and in some ways it looks ungovernable. Certain neighborhoods are ungoverned. The city council is, for the most part, a bunch of frauds and opportunists. You know what I'm saying? We have a mayor that
She can't spell Eagles.
can't spell eagle, and then going to go all out for Center City Arena for the 76ers, like we need that. And then the white people behind it and pulling the strings, telling her what to do. They go down and meet in Maryland and decide, no, we can't go this way, and then come back and tell the newspapers, and she and Kenyatta Johnson in the city council found out that the rug was pulled out from under them by the white man who was running everything anyway. So why we need you? I mean, who is running this thing, and how is it being run? Okay, those possibilities. But I think this idea of an all-humanity struggle for peace and democracy can still be put on the table for discussion. And what do we mean by all humanity? And what do we mean by peace and democracy? I think such a way of thinking, such a way of organizing fits perfectly with where the people are and what the people want. The people want democracy, they want governance, they want government, and they want no more war.
Well, there was a lot, but I wanted to get back to some of the things you started with, and maybe we can, I think there's a lot to say because you're talking like I think this thing that you said in the beginning about Trump's abandonment of the West and the shift, basically the shift from the centrality of Europe to the centrality of Asia, which is what we talk about a lot. I think this week really like a bunch of everything you mentioned really it happened so fast that it sort of takes time to really assess what this means and the peace talks with Russia and the denuclearization, but then also the Trump movement, like Trump himself, but also I think Vance. He went to Europe and I think he pretty much, like what he was saying about Europe was that, there can be no security in Europe which which only talks about the threat from outside of Russia and ignores the democratic dissent of Europe's own people.
Right.
Which I agree that it's radically it's fundamentally opposite from how the post-Cold War consensus has been like when we talk about Europe and democracy and so on. And which is why when you say the trilateral summit that Trump is organizing, or he's talking about now between US, Russia, and China. And I was thinking of this in contrast with right after Biden comes into power, he organizes this democracy summit, which was with all these like nations in Europe, like the G7 and all of that, and it's
And in Asia, South Korea,
and South
Taiwan,
Korea and Japan, and so it's
maybe the Philippines.
right. So it's like it is the reversal of the post Cold War status of what does it even mean to be like what does the West mean? That's why I was like going back to what you were saying about this idea of abandoning the idea of the West. And this seems to be a huge, like at least a possibility about where we might be going from here. So I appreciate what you were saying about
Can I just so I think my perspective is the Afro-Asiatic ascending. Now, of course, Africa is not moving as swiftly or as decisively as Asia. There's no two ways about it. But with the two, it's almost what they call the global south. It makes irreversible. It's not even challengeable any longer where the future lies. I just want to. Is that finished?
Yeah, and I mean, I just wanted to bring up the contrast with with what the post-Cold War state has been, and especially with the last administration, and the championing of democracy, and how pretty much how this has led to such a fast reversal almost in the going in the other direction, and and the other thing I wanted to this thing you were saying about Bannon and Hedges. Yeah, I think the question of epistemology is really essential now, because I was thinking when I was watching both of them that they do have an idea of who they're talking to, and it seems that Hedges almost it's like he's talking to the left. That's what it seemed like. He's talking to the leftist intellectual and so on. And I can't quite place. I couldn't quite place who Bannon is talking to, but I think I think you're right. I mean, he's talking to the white worker who still sees that, or at least the MAGA movement in the epistemology that comes out of Bannon. The MAGA movement still is not complete in the sense that it doesn't see the transformation of whiteness. It doesn't see the contradiction of whiteness, and it still sees that the future of the white worker is probably closer to the white elite than the black worker. And I mean, I was thinking of this that we can't really like the reason we talk about like Bannon and Hedges and what these, after all, these are public intellectuals. What they say about this time, it really reflects something about the time. But I think we are asking what does this have to do with the people? How do the people see this? And the reason they are incomplete is because they don't have an understanding. And even with Hedges, I mean, I think Hedges mentions, he brings up Du Bois multiple times and so on. He keeps throwing them around.
Was it multiple times? I saw one time.
I think he mentions King again at some point, and he sort of I think refers to this, but I think this is what the leftist intellectual can't ignore Du Bois today. So it doesn't mean much that you're talking about Du Bois, but then his attempt seems to be it is I thought what you were saying, that this is a kind of virtue signaling really obscured the question of where are the people at.
Yeah.
That was, and the other thing was, he talks about, I guess, this book, The Defeat of Liberalism, that he wrote. But when he talks about it, I wondered if he means, he accepts that the liberals have been defeated, but I don't know if he accepts that liberalism has been defeated. Or, the fact that we are at a time when the theories of, like the theories that come out of liberalism, they don't serve us anymore. I don't know if that's exactly what he would say, because it's like he's talking about, okay, yes, all these liberals, like they sort of, it's their inadequacy or their corruption that like that has brought us here. That's sort of how he like throws in the boys, because he was attacked by the liberals of the apartheid era and all. But then the question we are trying to ask is, how do we understand this time, and can the theories of liberalism describe this time? And I don't think Hedges, I don't think he can afford to go there. And this is why I feel at this time is very important what you're saying, that we have to see the contradiction, even like especially in Hedges and what the left has been. Like what
Hedges is pretty much a disillusioned liberal. A disillusioned liberal, yes. And he shows all the signs of disillusionment and anger. The narrative that you hear a lot of people, the Democrats lost, they blew it, they should not have lost, that kind of thing. And matter of fact, when he talks about Kamala's campaign, but with vapid, celebrity driven, yada yada yada. Well, would Biden been any different? Well, would Bernie Sanders have been that different?
Right.
But anyway,
right? No, that's true. That's all I had.
Oh, yeah. Just going off of that point, my first impression about Chris Hedges, the interview with Mark Lamont here, was that it seemed, first of all, that he was really frustrated. It sounded like sort of this Huskin interview to me where, it's almost like you gave up, and nothing you thought would worked out. And so now you're vitriolic and you're looking for people to blame, and you're like, oh, the Democratic Party, effed up, they lost the working class. But then the working class, the way you talk about it, it just still seems so abstract, because you're talking about the working class, but then you sort of see them only as, pawns in a game between the corporatists and the oligarchs, and with no real agency of themselves. So the rule, like, these different parts of the ruling class that are fighting with each other, either like win or lose you, but you don't have any agency to transform or to basically have any agency to decide what direction the country would move forward in. And I think it's, in general, it's just a very narrow way to analyze what happened on November 5th, which I think in free school, the way we've talked about it, is more to see the victory of the American people in handing a defeat to a ruling class that basically had abandoned them. And that's how we would see it, instead of, in the battle between oligarchs and corporatists, the oligarchs won.
But then which ones are the fascists? Because that's a big part of Hedges' thing.
Right. Well, the other thing is how out of touch his analysis of what Trump's actual agenda, or what the populist agenda even is. Well, first of all, there's this thing of fascism, and even Mark Lamont Hill tries to ask him, isn't it a little too extreme to call this fascism? Yeah, hyperbolic. But then he says, oh no, it doesn't look the same. It's not going to look like Nazi Germany, but it is, in fact, fascism, I guess, because he says it is. But then the other thing is he sort of focuses on things, or he focuses on outcomes that he imagines, which I don't know. Where is the evidence of that actually happening? Because he's talking about how, what the oligarchs want is privatization, for everything to be made private, post offices, this and that. And I don't know, maybe I don't understand, but is that the evidence of this what we are seeing as the takedown of the administrative state.
Those are happening.
But like I'm sure like it's happening. Like a lot of these things, maybe in what I mean to say is that the broadest analysis of what Trump is trying to do, and I think he gets that wrong. He sees it more in like structural differences and I think I lost my train of thought.
Worsted.
I think for me, what I really felt was like one of Hedges' main weaknesses is that he basically does assume that Trump is a fascist and that this brand or like this word fascism is the worst possible outcome. And so even though he criticizes the Democrats, says that they're complicit or that basically they made themselves ineffective and handed themselves over, and in many ways that he sees even like the Democrats and the Republicans as like one mega party, which I feel like is kind of a common leftist critique. But then still he distinguishes the Democrats and the Republicans to say, yeah, like one is corporatist and one is oligarchic, and maybe actually the corporatist way is like perhaps better because the oligarchic form is what opens up fascism, which I feel like is basically starting from like, okay, like Trump equals fascism, that's the worst possible thing. Therefore, anything that prevents the slide is a little bit better, even if it's problematic. But I think like the corporatist, like that word was interesting to me because like the contrast between corporatism and oligarchy, because for one thing, I think oligarchy is a very confusing term. Like it's not really clear what immediately means. Where it's like, oh, like, is it about a certain like type of person, like a certain rich person? Is it just that there's a lot of power concentrated in a few individuals? Like, what do you actually mean by that? But with like the corporatist state, I did think it was interesting that basically it's this idea that like the Democrats are interested in a stable system.
That's what he said.
Like a stable system that over time returns certain like dividends, but basically is not trying to go for like the big game or like drastic changes. And so that essentially the Democratic Party is the party of the status quo. And that actually like that the state's function to be stable or to be what it is actually like the main, that is what prevents fascism or the opening up of these very drastic, like chaotic changes, which could be bad. And that's basically what it is. And that oligarchy is like bad or wrong because it disrupts like the status quo, the administrative state, like the corporate state that all of us have like supposedly consented to or accept as a necessary evil for like basically stability. And I feel like in some ways because of that, it obscures the question of like, yeah, like what is the state really? And is, even if you call it an oligarchic form, if you define oligarchy as like concentration in the hands of a few individuals, and Trump is one of those individuals, but I think the question is not really like the form at the moment, but I think what is actually happening, which is that Trump is attacking like the state. Yeah. He's attacking like the status quo, and he's attacking like the administrative state, all of that. Yeah, but I think Hedges basically he just does not like, I think he's just uncomfortable or just like cannot accept the reality of Trump, like the complexity, like, and so he wants to label it as like fascism, oligarchy, which are like just his terms that he is opposed to because he's a leftist. And yeah, but
Can I just ask one question? Why should we believe Hedges when he defines himself as a leftist? I mean, I don't find any evidence that he is that.
actually Trump is doing, I think Hedges is, because really Trump in a lot of ways, in actuality, is doing more what Hedges really should be supportive of.
Like
in a lot
the
of
peace
cases.
question.
Yeah, like peace question, like what you were saying about how when Trump is like, we should 50%, we should reduce, like the US, China, and Russia together, we will reduce our military spending by 50%. I mean, that's huge. That is what you said. It's basically what King was calling for.
Like that is a concrete policy of a vision that King was calling for. And yeah, I know you want to say something first.
Well, because also the other thing that troubled me a little bit, I think, was that Chris Hedges, as a self-identified leftist, therefore
Yes.
anti-fascist, anti-oligarchic,
Yeah, right.
like basically he wants to establish his working class bona fides, but also he feels like in some ways the left is entitled to the working class and that they naturally, like, of course should. And so basically because he's rejected already whatever might come of Trump, his thing, like he says to Mark Lamont Hill, is like, oh, like we basically need to go back to the labor unions, like we need to like revive the working class movement because it's totally dead, and basically like start from scratch. Because like he's decided like the Democratic Party obviously is not it. The Republican Party is like intolerable for the reasons that he just has decided, and therefore like the working class is lost. There's no structure. There's nothing that can be done because he refuses to, I think, actually see. And then I feel like the one other thing was that the thing is that it's hard for me to make sense of what is really happening, because I don't think that Hedges is like a totally like bad faith, like totally like I feel like he doesn't have like a clear view of the significance of like the Black worker or Black America. But I feel like in some ways, like the way that I guess he talks about like Gaza, and then also when he was like, we have to like save our souls, I feel like he clearly doesn't see a way, but he's like, oh, like I just feel like there is some sort of moral thing. But I think it's like, I feel like that is also one of the common things of like maybe the leftists who are like trying to make sense of something, where it's like, oh, like clearly we failed, or like clearly something's not right, but then how do you actually recalibrate to reality?
I just wanted to like this thing, because what you were saying about good faith versus bad faith. I mean, even the way he talks about his working class background, or feels the need to say, oh, I do not condone their views, like the views of my family in Maine. They say it because they're ignorant. They say it because they don't know. And honestly, I feel like this leftist, or like you said, self-proclaimed leftist arrogance of knowing better than the working classes and feeling like you have everything to teach, I think that's sort of automatically why he appears bad faith, even though he might like this thing of, oh, the Democratic Party is the party of war, the Democratic Party is the party of status quo. He's saying all of these things, but what is your relationship to the people that you are claiming to speak on behalf of, But I just wanted to quickly also contrast something with the Bannon interview. Well, the Ross Douthat interview was harder to watch than the other one he does with like a British interviewer. I like the other one much better. Maybe because he's talking to Ross as a conservative who he disagrees with. He goes hard. I don't know what it is. Or maybe it's New York Times something. But one of the things, just like listening to what he has been saying in general, and what we can also see about some of the moves the Trump administration is making. Well, first of all, like you said, I agree. He's not Trump, so not everything he says we need to take seriously as what is ultimately going to be the position of the administration. One thing, especially where he talks about this onslaught against the intelligence state, and now with like Tulsi Gabbard actually having been confirmed or whatever, one of the things that feels very significant for me, even this thing of radical transparency, and he says we need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back to even before Trump was elected, and actually look at what was done to American society by...
You mean Chris Hedges?
No, Steve Bannon. I'm talking about Steve Bannon now. He says we need to go back, and this is why they're talking about declassifying all these files. And the thing that's significant to me is the purpose of all of this is to give all of that knowledge back to the people as a more secure way of exposing what the mechanisms or the levers of power have been for so many years, and holding it to light in front of the people, which I think in general I feel favors democracy much more than the kind of approach that Chris Hedges thinks about. for people to know what was really done, who are the players, what was the play, and basically, how things have happened since that period of assassinations, and then going on to the collapse of the Soviet Union and then everything that came afterwards. And I think that seemed significant to me. This idea of you give back knowledge to the people so that they know how to make a better decision. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to add, I think even obviously in talking about Trump, a lot of what you have to deal with people and how they react to him is almost like there's this term of epistemological closure where everything is closed off, and it's kind of like the teleological thing that you said, where I do think that there's like a lot of confirmation bias, especially with like the whole Trump strategy of flooding the zone and like saying the most like, on the one hand, like the most inspiring and like genuinely potentially revolutionary things, but then also the most horrendous things that you could possibly imagine, like with the Gaza stuff. Like, I think there is a lot of confirmation bias where you only really see, like, because Trump is trying to flood the zone, you only really see the things that like confirm essentially your whole narrative of, yeah, like Trump is a liar, or that like Trump will say he's going against the deep state, but he's not serious, or like whatever. And I think that that's a lot of what I feel like, because Trump has been such a force in American life for this amount of time. I think at this point, it's hard for, I think, many people to kind of have almost like epistemological openness if you've already made up your mind about him. So I feel like that's one part of it. But I also want to talk about or bring up, like, I guess on the topic of like narrative hegemony, like I feel like in the news, the phrase that has been the most pushed to the forefront by the media is this whole thing of constitutional crisis.
Yes.
And actually, I've been thinking about it because I feel like I listen to the New York Times a lot. I listen to the Wall Street Journal a lot. And I like read all these these long op-eds and columns in the New York Times about how Trump is triggering a constitutional crisis. And
we're shaking our heads.
Right.
We're the beneficiaries, something like that.
Yeah. But it's because I guess we've been talking about this, but Trump's whole concept of himself and of his leadership is that he is a unitary executive.
Yeah.
He holds, because he's been elected by the people, he can act in a way which is much more kind of consolidated in terms of almost like the way that you can see it is that he operates as almost like not a rival state, but like a rival power, both within the state, but also in opposition to it. And I think obviously like the actual concrete things that like, let's say the New York Times will say of like why it could be a constitutional crisis is that you have, for instance, these court cases which are now being filed against Trump. And if Trump ignores the court cases, which is basically destroying the so-called, balance of powers between the executive branch, judiciary branch, and Congress. And it's interesting because actually, like, I was thinking about it, and like, I think there have actually been several presidents who've probably actually triggered constitutional crises, but the one that came to mind actually the most was Lincoln, because if you think about it, like, I was trying to do research on this, but a lot of the things that Lincoln did during the Civil War basically were in actual defiance of the Constitution. One, even this thing of declaring war on the southern states after they seceded, like that was contrary to the constitutional notion that like the states participating in the U.S. was like a voluntary thing, and if the states want to leave, then that's their right to do so. But then Lincoln declares war on the southern states, and that was basically going against the Constitution. And then I guess the other examples that are brought up are like habeas corpus, kind of suspending habeas corpus. But then, interestingly, I was reading this New York Times article about it from like 2020 or 2019 that the Emancipation Proclamation itself was in many ways the greatest kind of Lincoln challenging actually the Constitution as it was currently configured at that time.
You're right.
Because that was also, like we said, that was an executive order by Lincoln to say that it's like he was saying that slaves in the southern states are basically freed. And the question is, did he have the authority to do that? And I think by the Constitution as it was currently understood at that time, he didn't, but he did it anyway. And I feel like this was, at least from what I've read, like this was like a decision that he actually was very perplexed by and didn't want to do, but then basically he reached a point where he had to do it. And that, I guess the kind of long arc of history is that like, we like, when the New York Times says that Trump is challenging the American Constitution, it presumes that the American Constitution, one, has stayed the same basically since 1770, whenever it was written, but that also the nature of the American state has stayed the same since the founding of the United States, which obviously we disagree with and we see very differently. And I think part of it is that like Lincoln changed the Constitution, but even like when you look at like what we've been trying to kind of intuitively and concretely understand of like what is the American state today, like whatever we identify as the American state, I don't think is really described in the Constitution itself, because we're talking about an imperial state. This is not what the founders had in mind at all. And we're talking about a state which also transcends really even like branches of government and is much more like, if we're talking about the deep state, we're talking about state and like public and private actors, which are basically like, let's say like the National Endowment for Democracy, which is supposedly like a non-governmental organization, but is obviously part of the deep state. So it's like the actual structure of the American state itself has changed dramatically, especially since the Cold War and with like neoliberalism. And so I think I just want to put that on the table because I feel like that's part of the ideological landscape of like, yeah, this whole thing of saying Trump is violating the Constitution or that he could violate the Constitution. But actually, I think Trump in his own way recognizes that like maybe he thinks the Constitution is important, but actually what he's more concerned about is the actual like trying to attack what he sees as the actually existing American state as it is currently constituted, and regardless of whether even that's described in the Constitution. And so I just wanted to bring that up. And then also I was thinking about, you know, like the reaction that like JD Vance got in Europe, but also in general, like there's been this kind of a lot of anxiety and some hysteria, I think, amongst basically what you would describe as like the vassal states of the American empire, like whether it's in Europe or even in like South Korea or like other parts of Asia, where you're kind of operating as like, yeah, like the US is like protecting you. And interestingly, the way that I feel like a lot of these governments and like vassal states are reacting to Trump is the exact same way that like the Washington federal bureaucracy is reacting to Trump, and also all of these like people in academia and university, because basically their existence, like let's say the so-called legitimacy of like all, let's say like the German government, the French government, or like even maybe the South Korean government, their existence as like a state is almost predicated unspokenly on essentially American power and American backing them up.
Absolutely.
And in the same way, like I do think that like this unfolding battle of like Trump attacking like budget freezes, like attacking research, like all that stuff, I think it's going to be really messy. Like I don't think that there's going to be like a clean way to do it. But like part of what's happening is that like whether it's like the DC, like this huge administrative bureaucracy in Washington DC, or like all these scientists and all that stuff, like their literal existence depends on a kind of relationship to the state, which has been essentially very stable and untouched. And they thought it would be untouched forever. And then now Trump comes in and he's like, no, like I'm actually like, yeah, like I don't care about you, or like I see you as the enemy, actually. And basically their kind of life world and their sense of existence is threatened by that. And I think, like, again, I don't think it's going to all be clean or that it's even going to all be good or bad, whatever. But I think this is kind of the dynamic which I've been seeing and like how it's connected. And then the other things I wanted to bring up is that, like, I like what you said about Trump's ideology and his epistemology is like realist, but it's also white at the same time, because I think it like even explains to me like let's say like Trump like kind of making that rhetoric around like, oh, we want to annex Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal, like maybe he's serious, maybe it's like noise, but I actually feel like to me it helps to explain if Trump's presidency is a phenomenon of imperial retreat. Literally the only way that Trump can conceptualize it, because he's white, is because he is to basically say America should retreat from being a unipolar power around the world and become basically a regional hegemon and a regional power in a multipolar world. And if the world is multipolar, then America should still be a major pole in that. And therefore, we're going to try to like literally physically retreat from the world and just try to shore up power in like the American hemisphere. So, I don't know, that's like one interpretation that I've been thinking about, but
Hey, Jerry,
yeah.
can I ask you a question? How would you interpret, or anyone for this matter, how would you interpret his relationship to universities and scientific research and funding?
I feel like
I think the message, well, I think he is trying to attack the universities. I think for the reason that they're elite, they have, so they feel entitled to their position in society as though they deserve it, and it should be that way forever. And I think what some of these executive orders are basically trying to send the message, like, don't take it for granted. Like, you do not, like, this is not guaranteed for you. Because, and I think that's actually pretty important, because psychologically, I think people, like the universities, the scientists, like basically I don't know, like PMC, or the people who have still had like relatively stable existences, while the working class has been like devastated, hollowed out, like all of these jobs lost. I think there has been like this confidence or this delusional sense that like, oh, even if other people suffer and other people lose their jobs, other people have no sense of the future, I'm okay. Like, I will have my job, like my children are going to be all right, like I have security. And like, for instance, the NIH, like indirect costs, they're trying to reduce it. They're capping it at 15%, whereas before, so basically like for federal grants to do research, when a lab or an investigator wins a grant, they get money directly to fund like graduate students, postdocs, or like the DNA reagents, like the chemicals they need to actually do the work. But they also get money paid to their institution. Yeah. And so that's for like administration, but also like electricity or like shared lab equipment and things like that. And so the indirect costs have gone up a lot. And some of that is because administration has gone up, like increased a lot at these universities, but then also there's more like regulations at the federal level that you need to be in compliance with, like environmental health and safety, stuff like that. And it's up to like, at Penn, it's like 62.5% of whatever money you get. And so if you win like $100,000 of grant money, then $62,000 also goes additionally to Penn. And basically the NIH is capping it at 15%. And so there's a lot of panic because universities obviously rely on that money when they're doing their budgets. And so Penn is likely to be affected, like lose like $250 million of money for like basically general university things, like employing like facilities, like staff, like the business admin who like run the accounts and stuff. And so it's triggering a crisis. Because yeah, like it's true, the university does have to like figure out their budget and balance it, and $250 million is a lot of money. But I think the outrage is also that they felt that they deserved, or that they should have been allowed to keep calculating and keep relying on this, because of the assumption that, oh, of course, like the federal government and taxpayer money should subsidize like the building of a new building for Penn, or like any of this, or like our like new office of like DEI, because this is like to subsidize the university, which is a public good, or to fund basic research, which is a public good. And that public good is like so important for America's interests. And I think it's like similar to USAID actually, in that like this thing of like the US needs to keep funding basic research because American like productivity and American advances in basic research show America as a leader in the world. Like that's why like America is respected in the world. Just like for USAID, like sending sacks of flour, like tuberculosis vaccines, like says that America is a benevolent, like good force in the world. Right. And basically for a lot of people, that's what they interact with more and actually like genuinely care more about than the question of like, I feel like, these workers are like the people who have been out of jobs, like the people who basically still have to pay taxes for this so-called public good and don't get anything in return. And I feel like it is the assumption that actually this is more important and I deserve this. And so unfortunately, like, sorry, farmers, like your grants are going to get frozen, or like, sorry, like maybe we do have to make some cuts, or like maybe, like public infrastructure is just going to go to crap. But like, we definitely deserve this because it's a net good in society. And I feel like that mentality I think it should be questioned. Like, is it like, because I think the assumption is like, oh yeah, like nobody says universities are perfect, but getting rid of it or like the chaos that this will create is a net bad. Like no matter what, it's worse. But I think the question is, yeah, like everybody is going to be affected in some way, but like, do you believe that you are above it and that you deserve to be completely unaffected forever? And yeah, but I think the thing that is of note too is that people do feel like basically their livelihoods, their sense of reality, or even their like lives are threatened or put at risk. And so I think people like it is like a very strong conflict. And I think there's many people are not going to think like, oh yeah, like this feeling of precarity, like actually isn't this something that maybe most people have felt and have to feel? And what does this say? Like maybe I should re-examine my priorities. Like does it make sense for like all this money to like go towards like a new building? Or like, do I actually think that maybe things can be reallocated? And maybe not the way that the Trump admin is saying, but like, shouldn't I think about like, what is actually a priority? And like, shouldn't I then say like, oh, actually, like we should cut like the defense budget. Like maybe like we should cut the defense budget to have enough money for
Well, that will hit the university's research, especially physics department.
But I think like people are having to think about where they stand and what they value.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I feel like there's this kind of common trope, whether it's with the Democratic Party or with these universities, where they think that their only real problem is a messaging problem. And it's like, if we had the right messaging to show like actually the Democrats do care about the working class, or actually like the research that our university is doing does benefit the public in this way, and let us explain how. Like they literally, like they're so removed from people that they think that as long as we can put out the right messaging, then we will have solved the problem. But the actual problem is that no, like the people hold you in contempt not because your messaging is bad, because they literally see you as part of the ruling elite. And like that's the actual fundamental nature of the problem. And I don't know, I feel like that's the hard pill to swallow, which I don't think the Democratic Party actually will be able to do along with the elite universities. Could I add like a few more, just a few more points? Because I guess like what I've been trying to think through is, yeah, like this question of like even like Trump's epistemology, because I do think that like, especially with this whole Gaza thing, like I know that many people say like, oh, it's just a negotiating strategy. And he's trying to put pressure on Netanyahu and all that stuff. Or maybe like it is that he's serious, but I think part of the hubris of Trump is that even if it is a negotiating strategy, like by saying like, yeah, like we're going to take over Gaza and we're like potentially going to send the US troops to take over Gaza. Like I think he is basically over betting on like American power. And like, I think he doesn't fully understand the degree to which the rest of humanity will hold you in contempt by like, not even like, well, one, if you try to do it, but also even just like saying that stuff. Because I feel like it does, like, he is basically, whether he realizes it or not, like he is doing the most to damage like the prestige, like so-called prestige of the United States by like basically brazenly saying, I guess what the Biden administration has been covertly trying to do, which is, yeah, basically to like demolish Gaza and to either make it part of Israel or whatever. But I think it gets to what I feel like is part of the complexity of the moment, which is that I think Trump's ideology is objectively like towards like peace and going against the deep state. But I think there are like components of it which are also like not just like white, but also like he does like, I think some part of him does kind of have this notion of, yeah, like austerity, attacking social services, which goes against even the whole thing of like, oh, we're going to end wars to focus on serving people at home. But it's like, I think that's part of what makes the moment so confusing, is that what looks to some people like attacking the deep state simultaneously to other people looks like basically, yeah, you're just cutting social services. And I think that's part of what I think is like actually like the complexity of the moment, which is I think there are people in Trump's camp who do see it that way. And like parts of like the Republican Party, which have been dominated by Trump now, which basically talk in that way. And I think the last thing I want to say was that even Bannon, I think part of what's interesting about it is that like he, I think, does represent an actual genuine faction and an ideological force in the Trump movement and in the Trump coalition. I think it's also like what's most interesting is like there was this interview with one of Bannon's co-hosts on War Room. Hi guys.
Nothing. I apologize.
No, that's okay. People can go.
Because he's from New York and he has.
Oh. Spend the day with
Sneak
us.
out.
No.
I'll see you probably.
Yeah, see you Tuesday.
See you. Nice meeting everyone.
Where basically this like she's like what 23 years old. She's like this young like blonde woman who's now in like the press room for the White House, and she's basically saying like like MAGA was not actually prepared for the question of governance. And like we are having basically like people in the MAGA movement are being confronted with like real questions in real time. And it's like you can't simply operate as only an opposition force anymore, but you actually have to be like, okay, like now that we're a movement that's in power, like how do we actually need to govern? And I feel like these are like I guess the real questions. But I guess for me, like I do think like part of it is that the question which confronts the MAGA movement is basically one, like let's say if Trump is serious about the whole Gaza thing, which I think is almost like a 50-50 thing, like if he's actually serious about trying to like annex Gaza with the US. But I feel like one part of it is like the challenge which confronts MAGA is can you actually challenge Trump where it matters if he basically go against the mandate of peace, which basically is his mandate. But also, I think the unspoken question which confronts the MAGA movement is, can you actually try to reach out to other sections of the American people, and especially the Black proletariat? And I think that's a thing which is not immediately obvious to them. But I think if the so-called MAGA movement even is to have a future, like it can only have a future if it's trying to actually find other parts of the American people and not just be this thing of like trying to like own liberals or whatever.
Can I ask you a question, Jared?
Yeah.
But don't you, I mean, I just think this, I think you may agree, that the peace question has greater political impact than anybody is prepared to acknowledge, even more than immigration.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. And by making this huge move, he has thus positioned himself in an unimpeachable place. It is where no president has gone, but it's precisely where the civil rights movement was
But I guess
60 years
I
ago,
guess
you know, peace and civil rights, peace and poverty, peace and democracy. Yeah.
I think a lot of where I struggle though is like I don't disagree where I agree with that, but like it's really hard for me to like stomach the Gaza stuff because I think
that's right.
I am skeptical of just saying that it's only a rhetorical move because I think there's some part of Trump where he's like, no, like maybe we could do it, like you don't know what we're going to do, and that's part of the whole unpredictability.
Can I ask this question?
Yeah.
You know, the negotiations, I'm sorry I had to go, but the negotiations about Ukraine are taking place in Saudi Arabia. Okay? Saudi Arabia's position on cleaning out Gaza is the opposite. You see what I'm saying? So, good. You see where I'm leading, don't you? Kind of.
Or even the denuclearization. Like denuclearization would require you to work with China and Russia. Do you think Gaza wouldn't come up with China and Russia?
Yeah. In other words, I think Trump is aware, in spite of the way he talks, that all the cards are not in his hand. That in fact he might have the weakest hand, and that the way I'm feeling, that Bibi Netanyahu is an impediment that weakens his hand. That's what I'm going with, Emily. Weakens his hand vis-a-vis Xi Jinping and Putin and Saudi Arabia. You know, and just one big quick thing. You know, Saudi Arabia and Iran are in a détente. So they're not. You know, they were previously positioned to be enemies, and Saudi Arabia was more with Israel. But
right. Well, because I feel like then.
When you had said that Trump is unimpeachable,
the peace position.
Because
it's hard to attack. Go on. That's okay.
No, I just thought that was interesting.
Yes.
Why do you say it like?
Well, see, the thing that justifies war and military spending has always been national security or national security, defense of democracy, some of that. And he has violated that consensus view. He is saying that and Heck said in his silly way of putting it, that our national security is threatened on our borders. Trump may say it something differently, but I think the peace question, and I think this is where we can work. I mean, we're more free now. I mean, we have more winds at our back than headwinds coming at us. I think the further development of the peace question, the cut of the military budget by 50%. I mean, those are positions that resonate in the depth of the American soul. There's, everybody knows that we need this $1 trillion, 800 military bases. For what? The ordinary people feel this, understand this. So I think that the elite, his position on peace places him in a position where the elites would find it politically very difficult to attack him.
Because they always have to use the rhetoric of like, oh, we are for peace. Like Biden was saying that literally for the entire year and a half of the genocide. Oh no, we're for peace. Like we want a solution in the Middle East. We want a two-state solution in Palestine. But it's like they need to do that to justify basically the actual war agenda.
And for him to say, cut the military budget by 50%.
It is crazy.
I mean, it's just, it's almost extraordinary. I'm afraid to go too far out on the limb and say, oh, happy days, But the fact of the matter is, first of all, where did that come from? That was unexpected.
The other thing,
And the denuclearization thing.
but when you had explained the different administrations and how they function, whether they be the Obama administration, Biden administration, how basically what you're saying is that the Trump administration is different fundamentally on this question, whether that be of peace or the people. I think that the thing about Gaza has something to do with the Biden administration.
Say that one more time.
Wouldn't the Gaza question have to do with the Biden administration? Or wouldn't that have to do with something, I don't entirely know, that based upon the way that Trump has operated himself and whether that be in the world with Russia or whatever,
Well, that means
it has the same logic to Gaza that Biden did.
No, different logic, but that doesn't, I guess, justify what Trump is saying.
The same.
Like, oh, we want to make...
Has the word, everything that Trump has been saying, been also analogous or parallel to everything that Trump has been doing? Because
I know.
the central, or what Trump is concerned about, is basically an entire renovation or entire structural change of the state and the direction of basically the country.
See, for almost 35 years, the United States, and that's with the collapse of the Soviet Union. This idea, America is indispensable, America is a single hegemon, that we operate on the basis of a rules-based world order, which has nothing to do with international law, but some made-up rules that the Bretton Woods, the post-World War II financial, military architecture, all of that has been questioned. The whole idea. See, and once the Soviet Union collapsed, then it was oh happy days, because you could then take all of the Bretton Woods, all of the NATO, all of the security, all of the CIA, all of that, and now expand it, into Asia and Africa. The situation on the Korean Peninsula, by definition, became more perilous. The only time that it, was less so was under Trump. I agree with you. And I see, because I'm trying to see, it's something the way he operates, like with Kellogg, General Kellogg on the Ukraine thing, and then he's forced to back, almost complete backing off of that. This throwing out of, well, we want all the people out of Gaza, and then I don't think he had any illusion that no Arab nation, even the most servile, would accept that, would accept it. But it's his way, say extreme things and then back off, because then there is the space to talk about maybe how we rebuild Gaza. And I only say maybe. But I think another thing that has to be taken into account, his treatment of Netanyahu compared to Biden.
Exactly.
Which means then, in spite of all of that money he got from Adelson, he's not allowing himself to be bought by the Zionists.
No.
But yeah, I think I wouldn't stand by it. It does seem.
But Trump announced another like $7 billion arms deal to Israel, though. Like, basically, I feel like, and then, like, I feel like we can say that there's like maybe underneath it there is something different going on. But I do feel like basically, like, at this point, like Trump saying that he wants to cut the military by 50% up to that, and then him saying like, oh, we're going to do this real estate thing in Gaza. Like, I feel like,
but that's the thing, though. There's a difference between what Trump is saying and then the administration and then the deep state or the people who are functioning that give out, whether that be in the military complex or the,
Wait, but I guess, okay, if
I'm
you're...
just saying, if there's different parts moving.
Yeah.
And like, I would completely assume that the arms deal in of itself was completely made. I can't say, like, I don't know.
yeah, we can't
Like,
say.
was he called and then they made the deal, or was there already processes in place that are in the business or are in a historical situation where they are breaking down or they're transfusing into something different? I can't say who made that deal. I do know that in the context of the what Dr. you were bringing up, which is a transition or things that are breaking down or forming new, that maybe I can't entirely say that Trump made that call.
But he approved it. Even if it was the result of other actors and it was an agreement that was already
entirely it tells something as to what Trump is going to do or what, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't want to be put in a box where I'm like, oh, Trump is anti-war, and yet this whole thing with Gaza, because that puts me in a liberal place. I'm like halfway.
Wait, why is that a liberal thing?
Because when it comes to it, okay, it becomes a problem when I'm not contextualizing Trump, like in like this moment. Or in even like this, like I feel like it makes a difference.
Okay.
If you want to.
Well, because my main thoughts from what Doc said at the beginning, I think is kind of similar to the way you're saying contextualizing, because like the three things I got from what you're saying, Doc, in the opening, which I think some people, like you guys were touching on at first too, but I feel like it's important to like emphasize them where, well, first of all, this is a side point, but I just think Chris Hedges is boring. Like, he's just so boring.
Yeah.
And it's what makes Bannon much more interesting, even though he kind of like gives douche vibes. Like, at least he has flavor, you know? Like he does, at least his style. Like, give the man some credit. Like, Chris Hedges is like just a piece of cardboard, like like flapping in the wind. And
Very smart.
yeah, and like, I mean, to be fair, I didn't finish the linked interview because I was, I didn't have time, but I was bored. And I was like, okay, I had to make the choice. I was like, Bannon or Hedges, and I was like, and then really the thing that tipped me to Bannon was Mark Clement Hill or do that, and I was like, I gotta go with Bannon and do that. Like, I mean, and I listened to it at 2 times speed, so I think I missed some of those micro body language, intonation things you get from listening to it at 1 point speed. But I mean, I kind of enjoyed. I told Alice, I was like, that Bannon interview was awesome, and Alice was like, really? Why? And well, part of it is because the first thing that I got from what you said in the beginning, Doc, was that this week represents a severe reversal. Like, that is the context. Like, because when you were like, okay, well, let's first remember what the real history of the world has been. Like what you were saying about a retreat from the centrality of Europe, which is, I mean, even thinking about the huge impact of the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the betrayal of so much that had even come out of Bannon, for example, like Cuba being able to exist, like all the legacies of the anti-colonial movements, North Korea, like they were all impacted by essentially this fall of the Soviet Union and this great betrayal of Gorbachev, and then also essentially like the West, and then from then on, you get all these policies that just go rampant, like the way Bannon was like neo-libs and neo-cons, but then this week what you see is a huge reversal, and when you put it into that context too, you have to like kind of first appreciate like what an intense and like special political moment this is for the whole world. And I even think the reason why I also like Bannon, besides the fact that I think he does have some style, flawed style, but still got some style. Like, and it's pretty refreshing after you've been in Asia for like a month. You really appreciate that like American like style of like, I'm just gonna say whatever the fuck I want. And like, in Asia, everyone's like polite, even though like people are kind of pushy and stuff. In America, you do have like that style in which people talk, where they're just very direct. But the way like Bannon, I thought it was interesting. Like I actually thought it was pretty accurate where he was like, we're in a moment where we have to heavily consider, he called it the post-war world or whatever.
He did?
Post-war international order.
Yeah. So accurate. Like that is actually such an accurate
Oh, no, he's talking about the
framework.
post-World War II order.
Yeah. Somewhat.
But it's not post-war. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but the post-World War II international.
Yes.
Because he's basically like, we should not go with what has been determined to be the existing established order. Like, that's a big deal. And so, like, to see this week as a reversal of like the Biden policy and the whole hegemon thing.
Right.
The second point that I feel like you brought up, Doc, is the importance. And I know last week's free school, like when you were introducing it last week, the importance of being able to define the crisis in America as one of the state. And that's another thing I appreciate about Bannon. Like, I feel like that's just so significant. Because if you don't, it's like, that's what I got from what you were saying, Jeremiah, where you were like, the mainstream media, for example, defines the crisis as a constitutional crisis. Right. But I mean, that's a total distraction from, it's not a constitutional crisis, it's a crisis of the state.
The
And that's what,
actually existing state.
yeah, well, that's why I liked what Bannon, like, the way Bannon was like, administrative state, like, but he's like, there's a fourth pillar that should not exist. And like, he's like, there's a fourth pillar that shouldn't exist. And that's why we put Kavanaugh and Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. Like, we're going to do whatever it takes and use what we have to like take down the fourth pillar, which is the deep state, essentially, this administrative state. And he was like, that should not exist. And, he's really focused on it too. And like, I appreciate a very focused person. And yeah, and then also the other thing with the importance of defining this as a crisis of state and seeing Trump as someone who is like shaking up the state, like the fourth pillar that should not exist, like, which essentially is the enemy of the people. It's an unelected enemy of the people, enemy of democracy. Is the other thing Bannon said was he was like, oh yeah, I really appreciate actually the way he talked about cutting down spending. He was like where he was like, our goal, like, my logic is we need to cut down spending. And he was like, and the number one spender is our military budget. And and he was just very aggressively about that. Like like for him, there's multiple reasons for we are going to cut down military spending. It is the number one goal. It is the number one way we are like just allowing people's money to just go who knows where. And in some ways, it's kind of related to the attack on the universities. Like defense spending is like the number one. Like it's kind of what you said. You were like, in order to slip things through the budget, just put in the defense budget. Like don't put it.
Medical research gets funded through the
defense. Yeah, like everything is just a defense budget. And okay, but I think the last point was is the most important one, which is the one when you ended on the all humanity struggle for peace and democracy, because 2 and 3 points, 2 and 3, 1, you have to define this crisis today as a crisis of the state.
Yes.
But then 2 is, well, once we define the crisis of the state, it's also our responsibility, like around this table now, as revolutionaries, to define, okay, well, where do we go from here?
Right.
And what will a people struggle look like? Yes. And in some ways, it's kind of like what we talked about since reading Henry Winston, which is, well, how would you define the democratic demand of the people today? And like, what defines the struggle? And this, I think, this was what I thought was Bannon's like big missing thing. Like, I think when you identified it as epistemology, that was helpful, but like, I really just saw it as, for someone like Bannon, and it is a very white logic thing. You believe that struggle will pass through one individual, like a man of destiny, like Ross, like of Trump, that Ross do that, or Bannon believes, like they're like, oh, he's an imperfect instrument, but he's the instrument. Whereas versus the belief that Trump is a mere part of a much broader struggle that is emerging. Like the belief that the struggle is passing through Trump, through Trump, or the belief that Trump is just a part of what is like all humanity, like a very large human-wide struggle, both in the US and around the world, that has been essentially in some ways been happening since, like, I don't know how you want to identify it, like maybe after the fall of the Soviet Union, but it's kind of like that law, like this law that human beings like have basically been defined by their strivings for freedom since the beginning of time, like striving for freedom, striving for God, striving for truth, striving for completeness, striving for their own humanity. And essentially Trump is just a mere part of what is a large humanity, like struggle of people for their freedom. And I think that's Bannon's blind spot, is like, maybe sometimes he uses the word democracy, but really in some ways it's almost like he's there, but he can't reach it, which is, no, man, what defines the struggle, when he was like, oh, what defines the next 4 years will be Donald Trump. Like that was the end of the conversation with Ross and Bannon. He was like, Ross was like, so you're saying the next 4 years, this like big political and social, like social breaking, defining next 4 years will be about Donald Trump. And Bannon was like, he was like, yeah, it will be. But the thing is that's the flaw, because we would say the next 4 years of Trump is part of a very defining, like epoch-making moment of the struggle for peace and democracy that King left us with. That King left us with, the people who came after King picked up, but essentially it was destroyed. This democratic demand that is part of our inheritance and is more clear than ever was also destroyed by the washing down of what the civil rights movement was really about. And I feel really passionate about this because like I'm also coming back from India and China, and you really get the sense that, I mean, whatever the American people are doing in America is really just a part of what is a worldwide universal struggle. And it's the all humanity struggle for peace and democracy. It's like there's no other frame for it. And I really think, I take this from Doc, but like we said it casually, and I feel like it's a really defining thing for me, which is, I mean, you have to say it, which is the architect of what defines the world today is all humanity's struggle for peace and democracy. The architects of King and Gandhi. Like, isn't that beautiful? King, the African-American struggle from anti-slavery, like the anti-slavery struggle to King and the civil rights movement, King as a crystallization of the anti-slavery struggle. And then you have Gandhi, the symbol of the anti-colonial struggle. Another very important like world philosophic and like people's like movement that have both contributed to this framework that we have to pick up. And like the very last thing I want to say is, I think when we, how we always say like, what's our inheritance? And our inheritance is the civil rights movement. Our inheritance is like the three American revolutions. I feel like for me, when I was hearing everyone talk too, I kind of thought like, I don't think an inheritance is just like the positives of what the people have achieved through the three American revolutions, the most important, the third. I feel like the inheritance must include like inheriting an understanding of the crisis.
Right.
Because I mean, when you were talking about the assassinations, you were like, why is it that you saw it, but then you forgot it? Like, right? Kennedy, like JFK, RFK, King, Malcolm X, assassinations. Like part of the inheritance is inheritance of the clarity of what actually defines the crisis, which is JFK and King. Why were they assassinated? They were assassinated because they were fighting for peace. They were going against like what would become a very strong fourth pillar of the American quote unquote government that shouldn't exist. Like, and that pillar is anti-people, anti-peace, it's white supremacist, it's anti-democracy, it's pro, like Nuri was saying, it's pro-stability of the established order. The number one thing it doesn't want is disruption. And I feel like, yeah, so that's
Can I just say one thing?
yeah.
And what we call the deep state really emerges out of the 1960s going forward. It is, and so just like the question of what is the moment, what was that moment, and what did they perceive as a threat
Yes.
to state power? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So basically what I was saying, because that adds to my point, is that if you miss what Trump is and like the world, and I'm not saying that like exactly, like I'm not trying to be like you're doing this or whatever. I'm just saying like a part of what Trump is doing is like, I think that explain why I was saying what I was saying.
It helps.
Like why Trump is making these moves. We are in the most, like you had said, this week or what has maybe we've entered in the most decisive moment in history. Like if Rubio says that we're in a multipolar world, that doesn't entirely mean that the vision of Trump is defined by Rubio, but that there's more, I think, to be brought out because of whether that be the conversations with Putin or I feel like Trump has something different than maybe anybody else has seen. But he probably
Wait, can I just maybe finish this because what Serafina and Emily were saying, I just wanted to add to that. But to begin with, when I was in India for 1 month, it was very hard to piece together everything that was going on because the inauguration happened and you suddenly started getting this like barrage of like news, this executive order doing this thing happening. He said this thing about Gaza or whatever. And I think I was more pessimistic about or more unclear about what it all meant. But coming back and observing things, I remember Shambartha and I had several arguments trying to piece together all of these things. But I think I've come around to a less sort of pessimistic or unclear understanding. I know there are still open questions and not everything is settled. We'll see how things go. And the deep state is not gone. It's still there. And that threat of Trump being assassinated has not gone anywhere. And the Zionist lobby has not gone anywhere, and sort of handling all of these pieces while also pushing through Tulsi Gabbard's confirmation or RFK Jr.'s confirmation. I don't think that's as straightforward as it's like, like maybe I would have wished that things were cleaner, but it's not that straightforward. And again, part of that is also something that happened this week. Tulsi, nobody thought that it would be done. This person who anyway, everybody knows the history. What it means for her to be at the helm of these 18 secret service or the intelligence agencies, it cannot be underestimated. And the way I feel about things right now is that the broadest lens to look at everything Trump is doing is what is going to favor our understanding of what's coming in the future. And if there are pieces that don't entirely fit, like this program of denuclearization, ending the Ukraine war, does the piece about Gaza really fit into all of that? And I feel like that kind of an analysis is important, because I think this is what Serafina was saying as the liberal trap, because there is that trap where you can think of everything Trump is doing as like, okay, we are going to sum up these parts and then we are going to see if the net is a positive or a negative, which is a fair way, I guess, of trying to analyze things. But I don't think in this context it can really be seen as a sum of parts in some ways, because there is a broader logic underneath, and some of it will not fit in with that broad logic. And I think it becomes more of a distraction then, or at least that's how I'm feeling after I've had like 1.5 weeks or so of being actually able to engage with things here. But I think I agree with what Emily was saying, is this is really like all of these things that Trump is doing, and especially the peace mandate, really needs to be put front and center, because the whole world is waiting and watching. And
I just think it's really dangerous to like not take at face value Trump's words. And I understand that it sounds like we're at this, what feels like to me around the table, a certain cognitive dissonance. As he begins to say things like Riviera, like we're going to say Riviera and Gaza, as he does, like, I mean, Jerry, what you said, I think is like the first time I've heard it questioned. And this idea that, like,
It's crazy.
but like, I mean, the idea that flooding the zone is just a way to convince, like, sorry, I've been twisting and turning trying to understand the logic. I wrote down those.
Can I ask, like, what do you mean between first question? Like, yeah, no, I just wanted to like make sure I understand what you mean. Like when you say it's been first question, you mean it's being first question here or in general? Because this is the question, right?
No, I mean, let's just say in our discussion today,
in
Jerry, your point, which was a valid, which is like, how can you hold at once the contradictions of Trump saying we're going to like level Gaza and put up a Riviera with the like idealism of the group that his true intentions are for a world peace movement, right? Those are in contradiction. Now, we've cited evidence that, oh, he's made the comments about cutting the defense budget by 50%. But even, Jared, your point that it's hard to avoid now the contradiction of the white supremacy that is still lingering, and it not even lingering, it is, I think, a core part of Trump's movement and the MAGA movement. When you see him say the words, the quote about Gaza, putting on the Riviera, when you see the press secretary wearing a shirt that says, "Make America Bond Again," that is inherently like an anti-human statement. And
It's an interesting point that's raised if Trump is a white supremacist. I think that the American country,
Speak up just a little.
that Trump is a white supremacist. America has a huge, disparate, and different population. Like we have different sets in class, and as it relates together between class and race. Like there's a middle class of Black people, or there's this poor of white people or of Black people. And then there's a question of the cities, there's a question of the South, there's a question of the West, there's a question of land. there's a question of, you know what I'm saying? So like, I think it's a really interesting thing. Like, what constitutes the American people, and what is the shape, you know, like that the people kind of like interact upon. Are they doing things for something, or are they doing things in of themselves? Whether that be like, I'm gonna, you know, go to a university and, you know, get a degree because my family does this or whatever. In the context, it's not as just an individual. And I'm only saying this because, for example, like a college graduate who is Black is also in a historical context of many people who haven't been able to get degrees, and now since they are able to get degrees, they have entered in a new stage of, do I become white? Am I struggling against a new philosophy? Like, what are the avenues, basically, of struggle that people intend to do, whether they enter in positions of wealth, are they in positions of poverty? So I think like it's interesting. If I think about a poor white in the South, how they relate to I don't know what a middle class is, but I don't also know like the bracket of how money is made to buy land and then build property, and how that also relates to poor white people. I know there's political antagonism probably still that exists between those kinds of people. And I only bring this up because I feel like this week I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. Like there's movements of people that want to do things for emancipation or for something, whether that be power or whatever. But I think that like the question on the table for the American people is how to achieve power and then be able to create something also different. I think that's a bigger.
Can I ask you, Michael raised the question of cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
That, flooding the zone could be a way of.
Here, can I
go
clarify
ahead.
that? Or really,
Go ahead.
I think it sounds like the openness and the hopefulness of many in the group to Trump's potentially anti-war agenda and his crusade against the deep state, which is like a concern that I'm on board with. I have some critiques of that personally, but I'm just learning and listening, right? It seems like those potentially positive aspects of the MAGA movement, as we're talking about it, then come into a cognitive dissonance when you have the ability to like excuse his statements on Gaza, when you have the ability to question, as Jerry did, whether or not the MAGA movement will open to folks like the Black proletariat. And if you have a press secretary who's wearing a shirt like "Make America Blonde Again," that isn't an openness to the Black proletariat. That's an absolute like inexcusable like objection to. So those are moments of cognitive dissonance that I'm curious to hear if we're even open to holding that space for that, and if not, what do we do with that?
Can I say something real quick? Or not real quick. I think one is the question of what is the project of free school and why are we talking about Trump? And I think, and I bring that up because there are people who come into free school and there are certain ideological assumptions that have been built over time that might be foreign to people who have just come in. And so in answering this question of why are we discussing Trump, like there are a lot of details that I think as a group we come every Saturday to discuss and figure out like what is actually even happening in the world today. These are the questions of the state. These are the questions of all of the executive orders that Trump has come out with. But then I think the purpose of discussing it is also, like I think Emily's point earlier is, what do we do with this information afterwards? Like what, and I'm trying to piece it together, but Serafina said earlier, building upon Doc's point, which is that this is a decisive moment in history. Is it why is it a decisive moment in history? Is it decisive because Trump is doing all these things and we're all collectively responding to it? Or is it a decisive moment in history because this phenomenon of Trump has opened up possibilities for the people to organize and to decide what is to be the future of America?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I thought, just so, Mike, how would you respond to what she said? First of all, let me ask you, would you see this as a decisive moment in history?
Yes, absolutely. However, I don't know if I share the same hope that the movement at this point, based on those who are leading that, will move towards the broader pro-human
Okay, now let me ask Alice a question, and so you all to. Are you saying that the MAGA movement is the movement?
So that also goes to the question of what is the MAGA movement?
Okay.
Because I don't know all the details to it, but it is presented in general popular media that it's white, and I also had, I think many of us had this question too, is it a white movement, or is it actually something that is in flux? Because I think not every individual within the MAGA movement, or Trump doesn't represent every individual within the MAGA movement, meaning are there genuine racists within the movement that are also supportive of Trump? Maybe, probably, but then you also have Trump recognizing that within the movement there are also individuals who are Asians, who are Blacks, who are Latinos, and that doesn't touch upon the question that we talked about in free school, which is you can be not white but have white values. But I don't think that that's what Trump is seeing, which is that Trump has also had to adjust to the reality of America and the people who are supporting him.
Okay, my fundamental disagreement is that while I understand and don't mean to disparage the diverse coalition of people that voted for him and to treat them as totally brainwashed idiots, though I think oftentimes the left does that, I think Jerry's 2 points about funding of the arms deal to Israel and continuing that relationship with Netanyahu, and the statements are just one piece, and then there are, again, I bring up the precedent, but there's plenty of clear white supremacist language at the helm. And how long until we can prove that this is good or bad?
Okay. Let Alice comment on this.
I think there are definitely contradictions with someone like Trump, but I think Trump is also represents America, which is America has a lot of contradictions to work out. I think we're talking about Trump here, and I include you as well. We're talking about Trump here because there's the question of, okay, if not Trump, and we've talked about Ross Ludat and how he has said Trump is the man of destiny, but we see him as a man of farce, and that King was the man of destiny. And so the question, one that I'm asking is, we're talking about Trump to understand the crisis of the state, to understand American society. But then the follow-up question is, what is our alternative vision? And that's also the question that I want to ask you, which is, what is your alternative vision? If not Trump as that force against the state, what was there? But then there's also this cognitive dissonance thing that you were asking about, and also the contradictions of Trump, is that, in the free school, we've talked about this thing of the 3 American revolutions, the first American Revolution, the second, the third. And something that has stuck with me about the first American Revolution, which I feel like we talk about, we talk about a fair bit. The first American Revolution is that there are some attacks that America has always been a counter-revolutionary country, that the founding fathers, they were racist, they were slaveholders, But then the thing is, didn't they set up a system that would unravel slavery by stating that all men were created equal? And then, the Bill of Rights, the amendments, so forth. And so yes, there were contradictions. They were slaveholders. Yes, they didn't address the issue of slavery in the American Constitution, but did they set up a system that would later unravel based on where the people went?
Right. So you're saying that potentially the actual leveling of Gaza and the building of a Riviera, if Trump went.
No, but that's a question mark we're asking here.
I know. So I want to make sure I state the question. The question then is, would it be okay for that to occur if we take him for his word?
No.
If eventually.
That depends on what you do.
That would not be okay, Mike.
Yeah.
But go ahead. Let me let Nuri. Okay. No, that would not be okay for anybody around this table. But anyway, let me let Nuri come in.
Basically,
But
I
just
think
keep going.
like it's not okay, and I feel like that's basically why like I also I'm thinking about it a lot, because I feel like it's not okay to like let him off the hook or say like, oh, like he's just saying it. Like it's not okay to say it. It's not okay for it to happen. Like that is where I stand. But I think
It's not okay to even say it.
no, it's not. I don't think it is okay. Like it's not acceptable. Like none of us feel like it's like, oh, like the utilitarian logic of like he can just say it and it's all right. Like I don't think that is okay. But I think the question is basically like, I think Emily, what you were saying, which is Trump the individual figurehead, and is that sufficient? And I feel like right now, like things are moving very quickly, very intensely, and it means something that Trump is capable of doing this attack on the deep state. But I feel like the thing that even I was thinking about earlier when I brought up corporatism and oligarchy is like, is that actually like a sufficient form for democracy? And I feel like it also goes to like Napoleon, like I am the state, and it's like interesting because it achieves something concrete. But is that actually like the final like resting form that we're satisfied with?
Right.
And I don't feel satisfied with it. And I think it's the question of, yeah, like is Trump the leader or the man of destiny or the person? Or yeah, is he a conduit or is he part of like the struggle, part of a broader reflection? And I think that the broader logic that people can agree on and come together for is this question of like a peace movement. And that's like even part of the all humanity struggle for peace and democracy that I see.
Right.
But no, I want to finish, but like basically like, yeah, like is Trump a phase? And then also does Trump see himself as inextricably tied and also beholden to this movement and the people who created him, despite the fact that it is many different people with many contradictions, things that have not been agreed upon and things that are actively being struggled on? Or does he think that he has been elevated and that now he gets to call the shots? And I feel like I say that because like in the Bannon interview, he says, yeah, like Trump is a realist, like this is a good thing. But basically like he'll have a meeting and he'll actually listen to everybody in the room. But then the thing is, it's not that the people in the room are coming to a democratic consensus and saying like, oh, actually like we disagreed, but now I agree with you, man. Like you're so right. Like we have a consensus. We're democratically deciding this. It's Trump who just decides. And he's like, oh, like I think this is right in this situation. I think that's right in this situation. And so I think the broad logic of the Trump movement, as I feel like we identify it, is that there's disillusionment with America as it is, and there is a need for like both like the disruption of the state, like the deep state and the administrative state, and that these wars are untenable. I feel like that is basically broadly a coalition that elected him. But I think it is also a question of like what is actually the relationship between Trump and the people? And also like, is it going to be, I guess, like in some ways a deference or allowing him to continually like do that? Because I feel like my feeling is like, I don't consent or I don't cede, and I don't think it's okay for like Trump to like say that stuff about the Riviera, and I'm not going to like let him off the hook for it. But also I don't think that like basically for MAGA or this movement to actually like move through and like figure out the contradictions, I feel like it has to assess what is the broad logic and what actually is going to be like the way to resolve it and synthesize it and move forward.
Can I ask a question about your point? Because I really appreciate it. You pointed out that there's a question as to whether we will continue to be deferential to Trump and his pseudo-democratic, bringing people together, listening
Sorry, what
to
do you
them.
mean by differential?
Yeah.
Or who's we?
That's actually good.
Will we accept?
No, she's talking
Are
about
you saying that
mathematics.
you're differential? Because I think Mary said that the people are differential to Trump.
Yeah, who's the we?
The mathematics.
What I'm saying is, if we are concerned, regardless of the differential point, what I caught from your point is this question of he has people in the room, he listens to their points, but then he goes and does what he wishes. Would you not consider potentially calling that undemocratic and to a degree like dictatorial?
What do you mean? He does whatever he wants. I don't understand.
You made a point about
Well, that's what Bannon is saying, and it's true that in the interview he's also like, I'm letting Trump do it. But I think it's not that he's saying like Trump only listens to those people because of the particular individuals. I feel like it is a question of how much those people and their ideological tendencies also do represent like groups of people. Like, I think what I'm saying is that I don't reject it. I don't think it's perfect. And I'm also like open and interested to hear what other people think about when and how it works democratically, and I guess when and how it like is not perfect.
but
Because
the opposite of the democratic function of it would be called what?
I feel like a lot of this is too much emphasis on the form of what is happening than on the substance of what is happening. Honestly, if you ask me the question about what shirt this press secretary, I don't care. I really don't. That doesn't bother me at all. She can have whatever on her t-shirt. What does it mean? What does it mean? You know, and I feel like one of the pitfalls of the left liberal community had been that they were more focused on the vocabulary that was used or the form that was used instead of the substance of what was happening. And that's, I'm not done. And that's and you know, they were the defeat they were handed was crushing, and we really should stop ourselves from falling into the trap of not seeing this moment for what it is and be caught up in the question of, okay, why is Trump not perfect? Why isn't he doing everything right? And why isn't, you know, if he wants to be a peace candidate, why isn't he going about it in the way that completely makes sense to me? And I want to also go back to what we said about the universities. I think the entitlement that Nouri was talking about, which is the only thing that has actually been taken down right now. We don't know what these funding cuts, what their actual concrete material, effect is going to look like. We don't know it yet. It's still being litigated and so on and so forth. But the thing that has concretely taken a hit is this confidence and hubris that academia had, that they were the most important, valuable commodity, or they were, because they do science, and science automatically is supposed to be taken as something that adds value to people's life. There's one can talk about where is the evidence for that, especially in a city like Philadelphia. But that's the hubris or the entitlement that has most concretely been attacked. And I feel like even in analyzing this situation, I think people should not feel so entitled as to expect that everything will be neat and clean. We are really talking about overturning or reversing, I don't know, decades and decades of what can only be called clandestine operations. Is that the word?
Absolutely.
Yes. And we are talking about taking that down or reversing it. I feel like a lot of this is much bigger than we even know right now of what is happening. And I think we should just be a little more, mature about.
Well, I think the most important word choices you used in what you said was when you called what we were talking about, that you said there was cognitive dissonance, because I think that's important, because I think in some ways that actually defines like the number one challenge to why we don't have a large scale people's movement for like a society that actually values basically the children who are not educated correctly, who are killing each other with guns that are provided to them. And because for example, I would define what we say in this room is actually very clear. It has more clarity about, one, what is actually the real crisis like, everyone's freaking out, including us. What is actually causing the freak out? Is the freak out that Trump is a dictator, or is the freak out that what Trump is doing, whether you agree with some of it or disagree with some of it, is causing enough disruption that is challenging the very people who've had a chokehold on the country for decades? The same people who've had a chokehold determining that 90% of taxpayer dollars from the poorest of the poor, lowest of the low in the country is going to Iraq, and we're even shedding their blood in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right.
And then the second thing is like defining, I think the other thing that we're defining here is, it's kind of like what I think a lot of people have brought up, which is, okay, well, who is, like, and I think maybe this is your discomfort, I'm not sure, but we are not saying that Trump is the hero that we've all been waiting for since my birth, like since I fell from my mother's womb. And in fact, it's the opposite, which is, it is a problem to believe that Trump as an individual man is either the savior or going to be the fascist dictator that takes the whole country down. That is giving one man, it is a belief that history is determined by one person rather than what I think is our revolutionary belief, that is literally the lowest of the low, the masses of ordinary people who at this point they have jobs and they don't make enough, or they simply don't even have jobs, which, by the way, there's like a report that came out. It turns out Biden's administration lied about the unemployment data. They were counting people who do temporary work, even for just one day, as employed. So all that employment data was a lie.
It's like a quarter of the American working population is unemployed.
Actually, a quarter of the American working population is unemployed. And it's like, we believe that the real movement is not the MAGA movement. Like, yes, the MAGA movement is a movement, but the real movement that would actually achieve a country that the American people deserve it's a people's movement that, one, like, understands what actually, in terms of like, what actually is the vision of America that's right, and then also like what form will it take, what philosophy does it take seriously. And like, we in Free School believe that it's the very philosophy and body of thought that everyone has degraded, and that's Black thought. It's thought that comes from the people who've had to not only endure slavery, but in spite of slavery and Jim Crow, and in spite of segregation that still exists, because I think Strawman Mansion is as much of an open air prison as Palestine. And no one's talking about that. And I think that is that thought that is not only has been waged the best resistance against white supremacy, including the people who had a chokehold in this country for the last 30 years, including like Bernie Sanders, who I do think capitulated to white supremacy and the establishment. But it also like represents what like all of us could like be like. Even our human relationships could change, like if we take that seriously. Like, and it's not just even the political movements, like the civil rights movement, but it's also even the music. Like it's even the music. It's like your response to something like marriage. Do you think women should just be prepared to be married or find a partner, or are women like just as much creators of art and revolutionaries and workers as much as men? Like, it changes everything. And I think that's what I would say. Like, I feel like what you were saying, I wanted to just say that, like, when you were like, I think there's cognitive dissonance, I think it's really important to discuss, because like, you know what I think is cognitive dissonance is my coworker. So I work for a trade union, and my coworker is doing pro bono work for the federal workers who are going to be laid off. Like, all these federal workers, everyone's freaking out about it, right? Because it's like anyone from the Park Service, it's anyone from like the IRS, to who else are federal workers? USAID workers. And my coworker was like, she's like a leftist, like a big like leftist, kind of like Hedges. Like, she gives off that vibe, and she's like actually very intelligent. Like, she like, you know, thinks about like society and stuff. And she was like, I had cognitive dissonance because I was like connected to a USAID worker. I didn't realize they were a USAID worker, but I was connected to a federal worker because I was preparing them to speak to at a press conference about how what Trump is doing is just a canary in the coal mine of like completely destroying the working class. And she was like, but then it turns out that the worker was a USAID worker. And when I asked her, like, why is your job so important and why should you not be laid off? She said, well, my job is really important because I need to help Africa, because Africa doesn't have like all this stuff. We need to build them wells and like whatever. And like basically neo-colonial thought. My coworker was like, I was super in cognitive dissonance because like I believe that Trump is a fascist, but then at the same time, the people who he's laying off were really basically executing the functions of fascism. And like, and I
I
think,
agree with you. I'm not for US hate.
no, I know.
Not you saying it.
I'm just pointing out that I think what I'm pointing out is that I actually think the most important thing to be doing today is having that ideological clarity, that clarity that I think like you agree that this is such a decisive moment in history. But the number one barrier between the deciding factor, which is the people, like the people taking power and there being a people's movement that could take the state once the state is in shambles because Trump is so disrupting it, will the people be prepared to take power?
Right.
And I believe yes, but the number one barrier to the people taking power will be no clarity on what is the enemy and then what is the goal.
Right.
And that's why we're saying the goal is peace. You know, some things Trump does actually helps a peace movement. Does he care about peace? I mean, who's to say? Who knows? But he's an individual man. What matters is whether the people see what he's doing as good or bad for peace. And I think maybe that's what you were saying, which is like, it is important to consider what Trump is saying. Like, that's what you were pointing out. You were pointing out that it is important to consider what Trump says about Gaza because it is a reflection of what he's doing for peace or against peace. And I feel like on the whole, I think we're saying, well, everything that happened this week, it sets up the people in an excellent position to build a peace movement.
Right.
It is an excellent position. And like, you can't really argue against that, I feel like.
And also, I would add to that from its conception, Trump's sort of positioning himself to end wars, to be the candidate of peace or whatever. I mean, I think it was responding to a demand from the people. I mean, he did not. It's not like he started all of this.
I'm sorry, I'm the book for Jack.
Okay. He started all of this. I think he was responding to something that came organically from the consciousness of the people of this country. And the other thing is, I agree with what you were saying, that the takedown of the administrative state, everything that happens, and we don't know fully what will happen and so on, but it really gives the American people a chance after these many years, after the counter-revolution against the Black freedom movement, it gives them the chance to reclaim that revolutionary process, go back to where it was paused and reassess what needs to be done to go forward. And whatever way this plays out, I think it's been 4 weeks since Trump's inauguration. So every detail about how this administrative state is going to be taken down and everything is not clear right now. But it does, like the thing that I think we are focused on and we have to think much more deeply about is really how do then, like Emily was saying, the people take up the revolutionary process, which had been taken away from their hands. It had been taken away, and then every basis, everything that could inform that striving even to consider yourself as part of the process, to consider yourself to be American revolutionary, so to speak, was taken away by that attack on the Black freedom movement. And yes, the Trump movement or whatever, they're not at that place yet, because, when Steve Bannon talks about we have to go back to the beginning and we have to clarify what the deep state has done and so on and so forth. My question is, how far are you willing to go back? Where do you stop? Do you stop at, 2016 and everything that started with Trump being criminalized at that point? Okay, you are going to declassify all these files, but how far back will you go to understand what really came in the way from the American revolutionary process being taken to its logical conclusion and the achievement of this nation that King was talking about, that Baldwin was talking about. So, these are questions, but they will not be decided by just Trump or Bannon, like Emily was saying. They'll be decided by the people. And I feel like we have a role to play to clarify these things, to understand what is at stake and to clarify not just the stakes, the various possibilities like Doc was doing, and believe that, the conditions will be made for the people to take this up.
Well, something interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Something interesting Bannon said was he was like, the vote. Well, this is kind of getting at the MAGA movement thing, which is Bannon was like, we knew that if we could get people, he's talking about Hispanic voters. If you don't vote at all, that's a vote for us. So he was doing the math. He was like, a vote not for Democrats is one vote for someone who doesn't vote at all, including not voting for Democrats, is a vote for Trump. But if you get Hispanics to vote for Trump, that equals 2 points. And I felt like it's kind of funny because he was basically pointing out that he was like, we're not talking about like MAGA movement, like people who are down with Trump, but to even not vote for the Democrats, like people who are upholding the establishment, is enough to like basically be part of this great massive people who are going to usher in Trump in. But yeah, I know you want to say something.
Okay, well, I'm not invested in this conversation because sorry, I'm just being honest here. And I wanted to bring it back to the interviews because my takeaway was what you were saying about Chris Hedges both being from the same white epistemology, overlapping in that regard, but coming from opposite sides of the aisle. But I like Chris Hedges because he's to theological seminary, but he doesn't have what Al said, alternative worldview. His worldview is doom and gloom. Techno-feudalism has won, fascism has won, oligarchs, corporatists are going to win. But I was attached to Steve Bannon's view of the struggle because he clarified the sides in the MAGA movement, if you call it MAGA movement, in the White House, and he clarified. And unlike Chris Hedges, we agree. He's racist. He has this front. He's a white nationalist, but at least he's against transhumanism. At least he sees the coming moral question, the moral quandary of do we want to live in a world where people choose the eye color of their children, and if they could choose the eye color of their children, what would they choose? Or if they could choose, the child's future to play the piano before they were even born. It's really the stakes are so high. We can't have any distractions to this question, and we were talking about the assassinations in the 60s, but it wasn't just JFK and RFK. It wasn't just Martin Luther King. It was their families too. The deep state is anti-human, and Zionism is anti-human. Zionists also punish the family members of people who fight back. And so I was listening to Muhammad Marandi and another guy whose name I don't know, but he was filming in Valdai, and he said that Donald Trump had formed this coalition with the Israeli section of the deep state to get his appointments through Tulsi and RFK and Kash Patel, and so I guess we'll see after the appointments go through what really happens. But Muhammad Randi is a smart guy, and if that's what he said, I just trust him on face value. But what Steve Bannon said about transhumanism and clarifying the sides of Silicon Valley oligarchs versus what he called the popular, and I'll end here, the popular MAGA movement.
I think he used the word populist.
Populist MAGA movement. He said that this is the movement in MAGA, which is that he claims he represents. That is the popular. That has the mandate of the people that's going to take this on. I don't know if this is I'm pretty sure this is not the movement, but all movements, people have a history of development. And maybe this is the people's movement in becoming. Maybe this is one of the stages, to smash the state, to create room for people to operate in, because we've been under this centrist unipolar narrative hegemony for so long that maybe just any breathing room is okay.
I know because I put certain questions on the table. And I think, I've appreciated the back and forth because like genuinely, I think there is sometimes like, on the one hand, this trap of like, even, I guess maybe this is what you meant by like the whole liberal thing of like, you kind of just evaluate politicians of like, I agree with that thing and I disagree with that thing. Like that's kind of the sum total of like how you relate to like a politician. And I think that's kind of a not really productive way to even understand like, yeah, like the role of any figure in history and like the development of historical change. But I think the other part which I am like genuinely trying to grapple with is like, I think, for instance, like, what was it, like Mo Green, who's like is it not Mo Green? No, it's Al. There's this a black politician from, I forget where he's from. Anyways, like, I feel like there has been on the part of, let's say, like liberals and leftists, almost a kind of relief, I guess, about Trump's Gaza rhetoric, because they're like, oh, now finally we can actually like be, you know, pro-Palestine, or that we can be, you know, like anti-war because Trump is saying all these horrendous things, like basically we can excuse ourselves for the past like 2 years of running cover for the Biden administration while it's actively committing a genocide. And I have like basically nothing but contempt for those people, because it's like that's a completely morally dishonest. And if we're talking about like inconsistencies, like that is the part where like I have the most disgust for those people who, like, let's say like Bernie Sanders, who's like basically running cover for the Biden administration while it's actively committing a genocide, and now you care about the Palestinians. It's like, no, like I don't agree with that at all. Like I think that is the height of moral dishonesty, of bad faith, of manipulative tactics, and I think it's also basically like there's those parts of the left which are breathing a sigh of relief about Trump's like Gaza rhetoric, because they're like, oh, now we're justified in trying to do another anti-Trump movement 2.0.
Right.
And that, I think this is actually where it gets to the question of like actual political strategy, what is your assessment of the objective reality of the American people right now, where American society is moving, all of that. Because if you think that basically the cause of this time is anti-Trump 2.0, like that, okay, like you can do that. You've already tried it before, and you're basically doomed to fail. You've condemned yourself to failure, and you've already seen that failure. But now, like you have like some sense of like, oh, maybe we can do it again. And like I think like that is like that. I think for me that is where like I guess, if there are maybe common assumptions of free school or like things that we've tried to work out over the years, it's like, okay, like what we're not interested in is basically this like anti-Trump movement, which is in many ways like probably the most anti-democratic movement, because it was basically all these people who for many years were like, I'm going to think that like I have an alignment with like the CIA. Like like I'm going to have like a coalition with like the CIA, the national security state, to try to take down Trump because he's a dictator. And like that to me is like you've basically abdicated any sense of your own democratic self-will, or any sense of actually like, no, like you can actually like decide like, oh, like I don't know. So like this is part of us, I feel like the stuff that we've tried to work out over the years. But I do think the open question is like whether it's the things that confront the Trump movement or generally the American people. I feel like where like I am moving towards, and where I feel like we are moving towards, is that like, okay, we don't think that the Trump movement by itself is enough. And I think it's also the Trump movement itself is confronted with the fact that like they have constructed a movement around one figure and one man. And that's both the strength of the movement, but it's also the weakness of the MAGA movement, which is that the strength of it is that in investing so much of your concept of a movement into one figure, basically like you're able to actually challenge like this entire apparatus of the state, which was so invested in like manufacturing movements, right? And like basically Trump in that sense is a vessel for like all of these tens of thousands of people, if not millions of people around the country who are completely fed up with the political system and see the elite as corrupt. And basically like we're going to invest our sense of like whatever our sense of democracy is into one figure. But obviously like that is an approach which never can actually complete even the questions that it puts on the table. But I think the value of Trump is also that he does put certain questions on the table that no other, I think, political like national figure has ever put, at least in this time, those kinds of questions. Okay, like literally, what is the deep state? What is the American state itself? Should America be an empire of war? Like all of those questions, like Trump, I think to his credit, has put on the table because he sees himself as a kind of receptacle for all these people like across the country. But I guess what I agree with you is that what we're interested in is actually not really even what Trump does, but we're interested in what do the people do. And that includes MAGA, but it's much broader than MAGA. And I think it's basically like what will allow in a state of crisis in which the government, like literally the state itself could collapse, or is in a state of like on slow unfolding collapse, like what will the people do and what will actually bring them together is the question of peace. This is kind of like what we're, I guess, arguing for, or what our concept is of like an all humanity struggle for peace and democracy, which is that the thing that enables like broad sections of the American people themselves to even exercise and develop their democratic capacity is the question of peace. Like that is what it allows people to come together and to be like, okay, like we may have all these differences, we may not even understand each other, like why, like all these people in the MAGA movement who have no idea of like what the civil rights movement was. Maybe the only thing that could actually possibly bring them together and into actually a kind of fruitful, creative relationship with like the Black proletariat is this question of peace, because that is the only thing that will actually lead anyone towards like Martin Luther King. And I feel like this is like I feel like what we're really interested in is the question of like, what will the people do? And that's like not limited to MAGA, but I feel like we're also not trying to act as if like, this what's objectively happening in America with the MAGA movement is like something we can like avoid at the same time. And so like these are, I guess, like the things that like I've been trying to work out. Like
to dismiss the MAGA.
Yes, right.
It's a very important movement.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to mention, I think it has been said, but I just wanted to say that, this idea of a cognitive dissonance, I think, I agree with, what you guys were saying. I think it's very important, and this is why we talk about the need for a new epistemology. Because it does not make sense in the way we think about the world, in the way we are taught to think about the world. But I think I'm also realizing what whiteness means in this context. I think it's the entitlement that is going to make sense to me. And, that's why I really appreciate what Emily was saying. Like, when, like, why does it, in what universe does, Black poverty make sense in the richest nation in the world? But we don't think about it, right? But, the moment something does not make sense to us, the way we understand politics, I think it sort of, all our fuses start going off. And I think I'm beginning to see that a large part of the anti-Trump movement, going back from 2016, probably a lot of it, was, bad faith actors like that, like in a coalition with the CIA and so on. But I think there is also something almost sociological to say about, what drives the people, what drives a kind of, like what drives a kind of person, what drives me, what drives you to basically reject like any possibility of, a new understanding, because however way we have been taught to think about politics, and we have been taught to think about politics only in the last 30 years. That's it. It's a unique world that the last 30 years has been. It's not how the world has always been. It's not how it always will be. And we're at a point where we're probably going towards a new kind of, a new kind of world. And I think the fact that it doesn't make sense to us is natural, but I think the reaction to it or the entitlement about it is what whiteness is. And that's why we talk about why we have to study the Black struggle. And it's not about reading 5 books by Baldwin or Du Bois, but it's really to understand the Black poor. And how does the Black poor understand this time. And I think this is why I think you've mentioned this before, Doc, but I was thinking that, it's true. It could be true that the Palestinian movement right now, it may not be the broadest movement in the world right now. I mean, in America, to talk about Trump, to talk about what the revolutionary process in America is going to be, I think the Palestinian movement has been a very important part of it. It has changed the world largely in the last year. But I don't think that means that the answer ends there, because I don't think we can, I don't think I think peace can also be I don't think we fully understand what peace means. I don't think peace is simply about the absence of war. And that is why even 60 years back, there were two peace movements. There was an anti-war movement, which was largely the student movement and so on. But then you have an anti-war movement that comes out of the sanitation workers in Memphis, which are, I think, very different. And so I think what we are trying to say is that we can't afford to be rigid in our thinking about what makes or doesn't make sense. And I think it's very tempting to think that something that doesn't make sense, it's something that will never make sense. But I guess most, like pretty much everyone here did not understand Trump the moment he came down the elevators. And so I just wanted to mention that. But also maybe we can get to comments.
I was just going to build really quickly up, because I think actually today helped me clarify a lot of things, or even this conversation. But I just wanted to say again, I appreciate how we framed so much of our discussion actually around two interviews, one of them being Bannon's, and then the other one also being Chris Hedges. And when I thought about how much you've broken down, like we've been breaking down what it means, like actually white supremacy is also not something like we only see that like Trump or like MAGA or Bannon suffers from. It is also very rampant among the left. Like it is what you mean. Like it doesn't seem like the most intuitive thing if you told me that like 5 years ago, but when you define whiteness as that entitlement that we were talking about earlier, even this entitlement in this battle for narrative hegemony, and the idea that like we ought to have the working class ought to be with us. It's just we just haven't figured out the right messaging. Like I think that is also very white as well. And like the idea that like Chris Hedges in some ways the left, like this is also something that I think we also say there's not yet a relinquishing of like a white worldview or like that entitlement that has happened yet, that also like needs to and very well like be challenged and like has to be exposed in this kind of in this time. And I think that is something that it's so clear when we talked about how like basically an anti-Trump movement should also not be this is the question that I think like we have been trying to figure out in terms of like what we're trying to say is not that like like even if there's a even if we're embracing or like looking to the ways in which Trump opens up certain avenues for or like is part of like this larger changing reality that enables a greater capacity for a peace movement, it's still like to I don't know, I'm not making any more sense, but I feel like what helped me today was because I also was trying to understand like why is it that 4 years ago or a couple of years ago, like the anti-Trump movement also is like showed its hand to be anti-democratic and essentially also struggled with basically white assumptions and a focus on like basically not able to actually see past its own arrogance, its own flaws. And so I had something else I was going to say, but essentially, actually, the last thing I'll just end on is actually how what you just said, Shumbarta, was the first time I feel like I finally made the connection between what we've been talking about for all this time around searching and carving out a new epistemology for these times. And the new epistemology essentially also is in many ways like what we have been saying about learning, like that the world increasingly must be able to see, like humanity must be able to see itself, see the world through the eyes of a Black person or through, and like the way to think, the way to see, like is very much why we've been talking about a Black social system. We've been talking about like Du Boisian social science, and that like this question of knowing, this question of science, this question of epistemology actually is another way of basically becoming closer, the world becoming, this process of becoming closer to the Black proletariat, its many traditions, its many social relations, its ways of discovering and using knowledge for freedom. And I think it took me a long, maybe it's because of the word itself, epistemology, like threw me off so long, but I think something clicked for me today, and I think that that's really exciting, and it's something else something you said today, Doc, that I really appreciated, that I think we talked about earlier, which is the idea that memory might be more potent than even living through the history, because I think that shows that so much of what it took for all of us in free school is one to we're young people who did not live through the struggle, and in many ways we're so removed from it because there's been so much counter-revolutionary attack on this history, and that we've not been directly handed down this memory to inherit it, but to actually in many ways to actually take it up, or to actually inherit it, and to actually, as people who never lived through it but still to be able to see the world through this memory, I think is really, really important. And it shows that it doesn't just take, the people who also might have lived through it are not the only people who can carry this forward. And they play an important role if they choose to remember, and they choose to actually live by it. But it also shows that even in this time, it is why it's so decisive. It is why this memory can actually ignite something much larger than just it means the struggle isn't just relegated to a really small number of people, but actually this can belong to all humanity.
Can I just say a small thing, just very small, just because this relates to the question of epistemology. Memory, it is so institutionalized in Black churches and Black communities, and it's almost rooted in the DNA of Black folk. We see it when we have these reading groups and people come here to the free school, and it is their memory that is motivating so many things. It's in the music, but I'm just so happy you raised it, because I have to give a presentation at the Free Library, and because we're in Auto da Vinci and Du Bois. This question of memory, but thank you very much.
This is a good moment to say a little more about your talk on.
Why don't we do the chat first?
I promise a quick remark. This conversation made me really excited about maybe our April event on Coltrane, Bootsy Collins. I think Mingus is included as well. Because or the reason why this conversation reminded me of that event and why I'm excited about it is exactly what we're saying about the Black social system, but also how, because when you go into North Philadelphia, and Doc, you share with us how it used to be, humble houses, but everyone had a job and there was community, but it was nothing extravagant, but it was out of the ordinary, this great art and music and striving for freedom came out. And I think that's what we're trying to understand for our times too, which is what is the capacity of the people, ordinary people, to create a new political system, but also new art and music and culture. But yeah, I think
Alice, and that's what is so distressing for me. How can we see this so clearly, and an intellectual like Chris Hedges or like Steve Bannon have no sense of it and are indifferent to it? It's an interesting, and I think it is an epistemological question and an ideological question. I hope to
and new epistemology also involves the necessary giving of the point.
To advance it. A lot of people have the idea that epistemologies have already been established. You have Kantian rationalism, Descartes, Hume, and these epistemologies are in place, and you work from that. But I agree with you all that questions of epistemology are always dynamic, and they don't come out of an Ivy League department of philosophy. they are actively developed in this course of struggle. I hope we can say more about this, but it is, I think, I agree with you, it is a very important question, how the people will know, because in a lot of ways, how the people know has a tremendous impact upon how they will be and what they will do. And that's why the ruling elite, either through artificial intelligence or whatever means, have to control the epistemologies available to the people to subvert that and to deprive them of this domination. This is why music and art and so on, the wrong music can F up everything. You know, the right music, the right art can open up people to all kinds of possibilities of thought. You know, and we see it. I mean, I just want to say, you know, the thing at October Gallery last Sunday was so important to me, you know, especially, of course, Jasmine, the way they think and say things. But then the woman that wrote the book, you know, Black Mother Deleted, you know, this woman had done time in the penitentiaries. She writes a book where she explores philosophy and everything from Aristotle to Freud and so on and so. Very interesting. But she's written it down, but people are thinking, and this is why the question of epistemology, I think, but we have to work on how we understand it, how we define it, and what its possibilities are.
A comment? Okay, I'm gonna do a seriously abridged.
Yeah.
There's a lot of comments. Many of them were really interesting, but I just can't keep track of all of them because it's too much. Okay, so Bambalai Todd, say good morning. Okay. Sith Lord Princess, hello, I just subscribed. I'm always looking for interfaith perspectives on the political economy. Afropolis says, you guys should look into transhumanism and accelerationism. Okay, Bambalai said, Trump was talking about releasing files. I highly doubt that any undoctored files will actually be available. Looking sharp with the kafia today, Doc. You were good with the, they like the kafia. Michelle Bell says, I have to agree with Steve Bannon on this thing of the tech giants having to get on the bus of Trump or getting thrown underneath it. Bambalai says, a lot of the people in Europe actually believe the American hype because the American media messaging is powerful. And then Michelle says, at least Trump will take questions, parentheses, almost endlessly, instead of ducking all reporters like he's Secret Squirrel. And then, yeah, like this thing of Bannon trying to play up his working class creds because he had to wash dishes at home every now and then. Pepe asked, have we asked what transhumanism is really about? Keeping in mind Francis Welsing. Let's see. Arthur Handy says, with all due respect, you've got Chris Hedges all wrong. Lots of JD Vance's speech in Munich was very interesting. Shantanu said, I think what was made apparent in the Chris Hedges interview is that he does not believe that a people's movement has any real chance to establish a democratic state of the people. People are disagreeing about Chris Hedges, saying that he's brilliant, no flip side to Bannon. Kwame Madden says, interesting class, thank you. But Shantanu says, yeah, Chris Hedges' focus is on the global economic powers and change only really happens top down. Kansas Mama said, I do have reservations about the dependency on AI that the Trump admin is proposing. It seems he's on board with digital ID and facial recognition, like Rose, for example. Bambalai says we should use the word plutocracy. Let's see. Yeah, like Trump pulling out of WHO, like the World Health Organization. Patricia Sanders says, great conversation and perspectives. There are a lot of people watching also. I think at the, like in the middle of your presentation, it was like 93 people or something. But a lot of people were like, I'm out. Jerome said, I write about US aid and my upcoming Africa Watch problem. column, sorry. There's so many comments. This is like 1/3 of the way through. Yul Adama says the Democratic Party has put themselves in the position of being part of the new problem because they're trying to solve all problems. Kansas Mama said, I don't know about you, but 2.7 trillion from US Medicaid, Medicare seems extreme, especially when so many here already get denied. Let's see. The Urban Educator said, I think Chris Hedges thinks Trump is lying about military spending and nuclear weapons because he withdrew from the Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile Treaty. This question of how much power MAGA has in the movement. Yule said, MAGA has no power. They're just a group of followers. Kansas Mama said, no power question mark? We got Trump elected, didn't we? So yeah, there was kind of a, and then let's see. But then Yule says, this isn't the first time in history that the elites have used a group of people projecting disenfranchisement on another group. And Bombalai says, yeah, Netanyahu or Bibi seems like a liability now. Let's see. Yeah, this question of, Kansas Mama and Yule are going at it again. Yule said, Republicans are using the same dogma and strategy as the Israeli people use on the Palestinians, making outsiders look like the problem when the problem's actually a set of people isolating money. Kansas Mama says, Yule, our bad guys were insiders. Our own government leaders were stealing money from us. Magna agrees with what I was saying about the NIH cuts as an attack on taxpayers subsidizing universities, and just emphasizing that universities are also beneficiaries of the war economy that Trump's attacking. And Bombalai says, yeah, like the rules-based order is I make the rules and you follow them. But then, this idea that Israel's now getting more weaponry and money than ever. Matt says, it's all still in motion. Too early to say much of anything beyond what can be observed. US imperialism may just reorient out of necessity with Trump as a vehicle. iManifesto says, yeah, Hedges has no sauce. Let's see. Catherine Blunt said, I applaud President Trump's huge stance for peace and the initiatives regarding peace that he will defiantly take. The question for me is, do we rely on faith when it comes to assessing Trump's pronouncements regarding Gaza and his denounced intention to dismantle BRICS, which includes Saudi Arabia, Russia, and China? But then she continues, even though I don't believe he can dismantle BRICS, Trump's public messaging is disconcerting and confusing. This may be his intentional public style to attract media attention, but it does require a faith that we did not have to have with King or Gandhi, whose messaging was more straightforward. Gandhi and King spoke to the masses in a language understood by the masses, to connect with and educate them, to push humanity forward. Trump is now isolating and ignoring the Palestinian and Arab people who were instrumental for his win. How will the youth movements that took place on various campuses perceive Trump's position about Gaza, as well as the Palestinian and other Arabs who are suffering? I have to keep finding more. Michelle says Emily's right on point. Yule says Trump's a side effect or a symptom of an issue in the United States and Western culture. Michelle Bell says Trump's inauguration speeches were bold. He really rocked the boots. Fireplace said 2 weeks in a row I've had a deeper conversation with a loved one where they're sharing their dismay. Both conversations led me to sharing Saturday Free School with them. Thank you all. Michelle is pointing out that Mitch McConnell held out on all the recent nominations and asked why. Let's see. Yule asked, does ending the Ukraine war really mean peace in Ukraine? Matt says there could be serious ruling class psyops at work that we're not accounting for. Trump is a lens at most for an ideology. Trump is a lens for an ideology that has been in the back of Western culture for a long time. There's a lot more comments. Nabila asked, why are you talking crazy? And then I think he's the devil who's letting Muskrat destroy the country. And then, why are we trying to find good points about Trump? And then Al Green was the senator that I mentioned. And I think sorry. 2 more quick comments by Yule at the very end. What social and financial strings alters the concepts that you internalize and externalize and share with people? And then art tells a story on multiple levels of intelligence, not just logical levels, of intelligence that trigger people, but it moves people emotionally and instinctually, which I think was on like the music conference. Oh, and Bambale also said Minga is filtering, and that's
Okay, so we'll be back next week. It's lunchtime. Bye, everyone.
bye.
Yeah. So.
Send to